We can start recording. Okay. Welcome. Thank you. Sorry, we're a few things. There was a staff member was exposed to COVID this week. Several people had contact with that staff member before the diagnosis, so staff is quarantining. That is why staff is not here in the room with us. Howard, the interim town manager, Howard Young, is on Zoom. Assistant town manager and Corey Stocker and town clerk Jen Torres are in the Buckeye room helping manage the meeting. Bear with us, we may have a few little technical things. Our town attorney has graciously agreed to run the meeting from the room, so thank you, Catherine. Okay, a couple more things. We typically cancel the second meeting in July and second meeting of August during the summer. For one specific item, we are reinstating a regular meeting on August 23rd. It'll be one item. It'll be the approval of a contract for a new town manager. That meeting will be noticed and announced in the future. Just wanted to let people know we are in fact meeting on the 23rd. It should be a fairly short light meeting agenda. Finally, I will be reporting out of before we start. Actually, we should take attendance.
Let's see, I could do that, but I'm wondering, Howard, is Corey or Jennifer, are they going to Zoom in to take attendance, or should I go ahead and do that?
Hey, Catherine, we could take attendance if you can hear us okay.
Actually, we can
We
hear
hear
you
you just fine.
exceedingly well, so I think I'm going to see if I can turn down the volume a little bit.
Yes, please call the roll.
Okay, this is Jennifer Torres, so it's Councilmember Hefty,
Present.
Councilmember Haskell,
Here.
Councilmember Taylor,
Here.
Vice Mayor Warnikoff,
Here.
Mayor Alves.
Here. Okay, all are present. So I will begin by reporting out of our closed session. Hold on one moment. Okay. The council met in closed session on July 18th and August 2nd to discuss our town manager recruitment. The council interviewed candidates and provided negotiating direction to its labor negotiator. That was me, town attorney Engberg, and assistant town manager Stocker, regarding the council's preferred candidate. Following these negotiations and appropriate reference checks, the council will consider a contract for the new town manager. The council previously canceled its August 23rd meeting, but that meeting will be reinstated, so the town manager item may be considered at a regular meeting. The council also met in closed session on August 3rd to discuss an item of threatened litigation from Public Safety for PV Now Incorporated regarding the environmental review for the town's housing element. The council voted 4-1, Vice Mayor Warnikoff voting no, to authorize extending the tolling agreement to November 10th, 2023. The issues raised in the threat of litigation intersect with several pending projects of the town, including the safety element, finalizing the housing element for certification, and coordinating with and supporting programs at the fire district. The continued tolling period enables the town to prioritize working on these projects and potentially narrow these issues. Okay, with that, we can move on to oral communications. Anyone wishing to address the council on an item not on tonight's agenda may do so now. There's a hand up in the schoolroom. Go ahead.
They're both on.
You might not.
This one?
That one for sure is.
That one, can you hear me now? Okay,
Closer to your mouth.
close it in my mouth. Okay, there we go. I'm Ellen Vernazza, and I have a request, and that is that you quickly create a new committee in town of residents and a town council liaison who are interested in getting our town to join with other wildland urban interface towns, both local and not, to work against these new California laws that are absolutely taking away our ability to keep our families and properties safe. Along with the towns that you would normally think about, such as Woodside and Los Altos Hills, this WUI and earthquake-prone area includes all the local coastal and hill towns from Pacifica down to Santa Cruz and beyond. All of the people in these WUI and earthquake areas are highly concerned about their safety. Many have already had their houses burned down. I believe this committee needs to be formed now rather than later. Time is definitely not on our side. To be effective, we need to bring in as many towns and citizens as we can to join the effort. We can't keep putting off this dispute until it's too late. We can't wait until new representatives have been voted into office. This will be too late. There are also other existing groups the town can join up with. One group is our Neighborhood Voices. Their statement is, we are a coalition of thousands of California neighborhood leaders creating an initiative to be put on the 2024 ballot that would bring back our ability to speak out about what happens in our own neighborhoods. And another group working along these lines is the League of California Cities. And their statement is, the League of California Cities advocates tirelessly on the issues that matter most to California's 482 towns and cities. Our advocacy team works with regional field staff and lawmakers to sponsor, draft, and support legislative and regulatory measures that promote local decision-making and lobby against policy that erodes local control. We also form coalitions with other local governments, associations, and stakeholders to advocate for common goals. Now, I don't believe that these groups are necessarily working with the WUI earthquake safety problems as their main objective. I believe that we ourselves have to now step up and advocate for our WUI earthquake-prone towns not being the aim of the state's high-density housing plans. I think that we need to form a substantial group of as many towns as possible in bringing our safety concerns forward to the powers that be in the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Dale Fow's hand is up on Zoom. Dale, go ahead. This is oral committee. This is the first item, so it's for items that aren't specifically on the agenda. Well, you can go next. I just called on someone from Zoom.
Somebody on Zoom.
Don't worry.
I'm
There you are.
great. Thank you for taking my comment. As most of you know, I'm the chair of the Emergency Preparedness Committee. And tonight I'm speaking about to express our concern as the Emergency Preparedness Committee over the town's council decision not to renew its contribution to EPIC earlier this year. EPIC, which is short for Emergency Preparedness in Communities, is a nonprofit organization within the area covered by and under the guidance of the Woodside Fire Protection District. Both WPV Ready and WPV CERT are operated by EPIC. WPV Ready is the primary volunteer organization for Portola Valley, providing emergency preparedness information, education, and resources. And WPV CERT, which is the Community Emergency Response Team, is the primary volunteer organization for Portola Valley that provides education and volunteer training about disaster preparedness and to first responders, volunteer first responders in case of emergency and disaster. The Emergency Preparedness Committee works closely with WPV Ready and WPV CERT. Two members of the EPC are members of the board of EPIC, and several members, I think the majority of the members of the EPC are CERT trained. At our 3 August EPC meeting, the EPC voted unanimously to support EPIC, and we are requesting that the town council reinstate its annual $5,000 contribution to EPIC as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Why don't you go ahead? We have a comment here in the schoolhouse. Just please start with your name.
Good evening. I'm Robert Trent Jones. I'm a resident of Woodside and Christ, a member of Christ Church here in Portola Valley for 50 years. I was also the state chair of the State Parks and Recreation Commission at one time. I was disturbed when I read the recent almanac issues about rejection of your proposed plan. And I have had a lot of experience with the bureaucracy of the state, formal experience. Having said that, I wanted to point out that state parks is about 1 million acres of California land out of the 100 million acres, essentially, which California and about 35% of it's federal. So it seems to me that one of the comments that I would make in response and rebuttal with the state is, why don't you do as you say, not tell us to do our private and open spaces, and look at some of the state parks that are lands which might in fact be candidates for housing if you so feel. Finally, as a planner, and I'm a golf course architect and master planner, the state of Hawaii has initiated a historical designation for master plans. In other words, they treat the plan as an organic whole, not as a zoning matter. And I think there's some instruction there, and they will give historical designation to certain master plans to retain its overall function. The biggest question is carrying capacity. roads are built to carry a certain amount of trucks, sewer and water, you know all this. The infrastructure can be overwhelmed and therefore so certainly items I hope you and your committee will consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Next hand up on Zoom is from Rita.
Hi, thank you for taking my comments. First, I'd like to say how sorry I am about the 6 people that lost their lives in the fire, fast-moving fire in Hawaii in the past 24 hours, and how quickly something like that can happen in our town. And so I hope as we move forward with any kind of plans, we think about that immediately. I encourage all members of the community to review the recording of the recent Finance Committee. It really talked a lot about the overdue audits and financial reporting in our town. George seems to be, and the group seem to be on top of things, but it's hard to say someone's on top of something when things are, 3 years in the rears. So hopefully this council is also keeping track of, each and every one of you is keeping track of where those things stand. And I just want to say, like, just from seeing what's in the news and the comments that other people are making tonight, there have been several planning meetings, I think 3, possibly 4, that have been canceled in a row. And the answer when asked was that they didn't have business to do. Clearly, they had business to discuss. So I hope as we move forward that we don't have 3 planning meetings canceled in a row, because there's lots of building going on, and there are clearly a lot of issues with HCD and other things that need to be discussed, and the community would like to discuss them with the planning committee, not just hear reports out at ASEC meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Randy True has his hand up here in the schoolhouse. Randy, go ahead.
Randy True here. I was thinking along the lines of Ellen as well, and have a suggestion related to committee of sorts. In seeing the different posts in the PB forum and the interest in this issue around the housing element, I think it could work well to form another ad hoc housing committee, but a very different one from the ad hoc committees in the past. I think there are a lot of different issues, and there are advocates for these issues. People feel strongly about certain paths. And I think having a very heterogeneous ad hoc committee with groups that could just be under that umbrella, this could be an opportunity to explore the non-Brown Act committees. They were appointed by a subcommittee of the town council. And some of the different views and approaches and solutions that people are talking about, those people who are interested in researching those, proposing ideas, connecting with other groups in other towns and states could then come together and then pursue that work.
Randy, I've been told that you're please speak into the mic. All right. Well, Zoom audience can't hear you.
Oh,
You got to put it right here.
I would first advocate that we improve the AV situation here. It's an
Understood.
ongoing problem. I watched the Moana performance at Ormondale, and we get some help from them and solve this problem once and for all. And I mean, I think that's one of the things we should really consider, is trying to solve some of these problems. And I think there are structural problems in how we've been approaching the housing element. I think the previous 2 ad hoc committees, the one on town-owned property and now this housing element one, were just not successful. And this approach of having this committee, which, although this is debatable, I know not everybody agrees with this, were selected with certain agendas and viewpoints, that hasn't been successful in them bringing forth sort of a single solution that they then put to the town council, especially when the town council is intimately involved in coming up with those solutions. So some of the key areas that people are advocating for: the ballot initiative, lawsuits, constitutional challenges like ones from Huntington Beach, which intersects with charter cities and home rule and issues of constitutionality and superseding agencies' decisions. Builder's remedy is a big one, in that there's been a lot of confusion, disagreement over the risk from builder's remedy, and then a group that's interested in that could be very helpful for the whole community. And there are pro-density, pro-development advocates, and we've heard from them a lot in the housing element process. I mean, there are people who very much support the YIMBY movement, and by all means, that should be a part of this process as well.
Randy, I'm
So-
sorry to interrupt, but you need to wrap up. But I gave you some extra time, but
Okay,
the timer's not up.
I will be fast here. It'd be helpful if we had the timer. I could calibrate.
Working on it.
Okay, so the product of this committee could be research and sharing of information. I mean, this was pointed out, I think, as the new council came in, that despite all of that work on the previous ad hoc housing element committee, it's not easy at all to understand what happened and to digest that. And so these groups could have just simple web pages. They could be posting files. They could be posting in blog format. It could be low overhead, but a way to collect, for example, some of the valuable information that's coming out now in PD Forum, but in a better structured way. And that could lead to better discussion, better debate, and avoid some of the problems that have landed us kind of where we are now.
Thank you. Okay, I'll come to you next, Rusty. Carolyn Vertonghen has her hand up on Zoom. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Good evening. Thank you for all the residents to bring back their enthusiasm. I hope that the
Carolyn,
members of town
I'm sorry to
council-
interrupt, but we're having a really hard time hearing you.
I'm in the car. I'm sorry. I will let the other speakers speak. Sorry.
Are you in the wind somewhere? Because all we hear is wind noise.
I'm sorry. I'm in the car. So, but let other people speak. Don't worry. Thank you.
Okay. You might want to try again after maybe when you get home or when you're done driving. Sorry about that. Rusty Day has his hand up. Rusty, go ahead.
Thank you. Rusty Day, Pinion Drive. I just want to reiterate and underscore a point that Rita Combs made about the cancellation of planning commission meetings and how this council can use the planning commission by delegating authority and responsibility to it and dividing up the workload. You're under an enormous amount of work. Just dealing with the rejection of our housing element in the next 6 months is going to tax your capabilities. And I want to give you an example of what the Planning Commission should be doing and isn't doing right now. We understand, we've just learned from PG&E that they've adopted a new policy. They're no longer going to trim trees. They're just going to turn off the electricity on a red flag day. What do you think that's going to mean in Portola Valley when we have a fire? How are we going to notify residents? How are we going to deal with the increased hazard of untrimmed trees? Shouldn't somebody in town government be dealing with this right now? Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie Kreis has her hand up on Zoom. Go ahead, Leslie.
Good evening to the town council and thank you for taking my call. There have been a couple really good ideas floated here and I just want to throw my weight behind what Ellen said about finding a WUI group or starting a WUI group. We are unique here in the WUI. We bring wonderful things, but we have our own unique fire concerns. And I would like to see us working with a group with similar concerns, as well as some of the broader groups mentioned by both Ellen and Randy. And the reason is not only do they support, I think, some of our goals, but there's a free exchange of information when you neighbor and share with others. And I think we as a town would be much better informed on what's happening in the housing arena if we were participating in these groups. My second comment is actually to back up Rita and Rusty. Our planning commission hasn't met in what, 3 months, 4 months? It's been a while. And with everything going on with HCD, I honestly don't understand why they're not meeting, and I don't understand why, for instance, the latest HCD letter isn't going through the planning commission as well, since that would give residents an additional opportunity to provide feedback. This is just a mystery of the universe to me. So if anyone on the town council could clear up where our planning commission went, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for taking my comments.
Thank you, Leslie. Gene Chapu has his hand up. Go ahead, Gene.
Okay. I'll make it brief. I submitted something to the council earlier, and this is the basis of my submission. So and I'm tagging off of Ellen's comments as well. There's a ray of hope to secure local control over housing futures. Bonta has an initiative before him to title and describe. Hopefully he doesn't muck that up. The initiative, if successful, would wrest control away from the state and return control to local municipalities and jurisdictions. It has been proposed as a citizen-generated initiative. And I might add, they need to qualified signatures 1 million, and they're trying to get 1.3 million just to make sure they have the 1 million in order to get on the ballot in November. And that's next November 24. It's been proposed by a group of banded together cities and towns in California called, and Ellen referred to it, Our Neighborhood Voices. My point is I strongly urge the town council to advocate for this initiative. It's one of our last hopes to retain local control, and would ask the PV Town Council to recommend to Portola Valley town residents to actively support this statewide measure by either by petition gathering, being a signatory, this in order to successfully allow the measure to be placed on the ballot next year, and let California citizen residents make the final decision regarding restoring local control rather than the overbearing legislated housing mandates that we're seeing today. So I encourage that support from the council. Excuse me. Thank you.
Thanks, Gene. Dana has her hand up. Dana, go ahead. Dana's hand is down. Okay, Betsy, go ahead. Dana, we'll come back to you.
Council, it's been a while since, oh, sorry.
Dana, hold on, we'll come back to you, sorry.
It's been a while since I've shown up in person, and I decided to come tonight because I've had such a hard time pressing my computer to my ear at home to hear you. I like not missing a word. And towards that, I was going to come and offer to pass the hat and purchase some new microphones or clip-ons or something that will help resolve this problem for those of us that enjoy staying at home. And that's a serious offer. But I also was quite moved by a number of comments tonight about the infrequency with which the second most powerful body in this town meets, the Planning Commission. I know you put a lot of thought into appointing these 5 people, and I would love to hear their voices out there. I think you could all use the support. You're the hardest working group of 5 in town, and I think they could back you up in meaningful ways. So I do hope that you take the suggestions that other members of the community make here tonight. Thank you for considering all of our appreciation for how hard you're working and what a big load you have on your plate.
Thanks, Betsy. Okay, Dana, let's try this again. Go ahead.
Hi, just a quick one. I watched the news tonight and there is potential lightning and thunder tomorrow. And that scared the bejesus out of me. So I hope everyone is really paying attention tomorrow. Thanks.
Thanks, Dana. Okay, one more hand. You're in the schoolhouse. Go ahead.
I'm Edith Collin, and I'm concerned because I've been following the fire situation for 3 years now. And I'm so happy that this town council has, is cooperating with, or the fire department is cooperating with you. And I think that's wonderful, and I hope that something comes out of it. What's concerning me now is that it seems like we all talk and have great ideas, but not much happens. I went to one, I don't know what committee it was, but wonderful people trying to figure out how to shape a document to give it to the next committee, who would then shape it again and then give it to you, the town council, which was going to take 3 or 4 months. And I know we need to be patient, but it seems like to get anything done is an astronomical effort. So what I'm asking is, can we get something done? I'm all for the idea of having councils that involve towns that surround us, because doing this all on our own doesn't seem really totally effective. And I'm concerned about Ladera, Vista Verde, those kind. And if there is that committee, that one of you would be on that committee, but to just get the process started and do it. So hearing that the planning commission hasn't meeting, we don't have a planning commission. If they're not doing anything, they're not doing anything. So how can we, I know there are reasons, how can we help them have meetings in spite of the reasons or whatever, but it needs to get done. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on, Linda. Christy Corley has her hand up on Zoom, and then you can go next. Christy Corley, go ahead.
Thank you. I also am concerned that the planning commission meetings have been canceled. I think there's a need for discussion. As you know, we can only talk 2 to 3 minutes, and the planning commissioners can talk quite a long time and go into the midnight hours if needed. We want to hear what our experts that we voted and we supported to be on the planning commission. So planning commissioners serve as an advisory role in planning and development approval processes, providing recommendations that influence approval processes for development, land use plans, and infrastructure investments, among other duties. We are all concerned with these items right now, and we would like to participate in discussions, deep discussions on these items. Please hold your planning commission meetings now, and how will Laura Russell involve the residents to participate in the housing element revisions? We are smart, we are wise, we have ideas to add to the conversation, and I also support Ellen's proposal to gather WUI communities together to share resources and ideas regarding the safety of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Linda, go ahead. Linda Brothers has her hand up here in the schoolhouse. Linda, go ahead.
My name is Linda Brothers, and I am a member of the Planning Commission, and I cannot explain to you why we have not met. I only know that we only meet when we are called upon to meet by the city or presumably the council, and that has not happened for months now. So I just want to make sure everybody understands it's not for lack of interest on our part.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, I see no hands on Zoom. Does anyone else in the schoolhouse have a comment? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. There are 4 items on the consent agenda. We can take public comment on the consent agenda, but only members of the council can actually pull an item on the consent agenda. Is there public comment on any item on the consent agenda, item 3? Karen Askey has her hand up in the schoolhouse. Karen, go ahead. You need to come to the microphone, sorry.
Oh, actually, I want to take this opportunity to let Mary know I got texted that they couldn't hear you. So if you can speak into your microphone too, that'd be great. Item 3C, approval of grand jury ADU report and response. Earlier, I saw a letter from Ronnie Krasinski questioning the percentage of ADUs in our housing element. And I think that should be discussed because if indeed the number is what Ronnie says it is, we should use it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on the consent agenda? I see no hands on Zoom. I don't see any hands in the schoolhouse. Does anyone wish to pull an item from the consent agenda?
I'd like to pull 3A.
3A, okay.
I think that's the right one.
3A's minutes.
Oh, sorry.
You want to pull the grand jury report? That's
Yes,
3C.
3C, sorry.
Okay, so we'll pull
Okay.
3C. All right,
3C.
okay. So with anything else? Okay. With 3C being pulled and discussed, I can take a motion to approve items 3A, B, and D.
I move to approve A, B, and D from the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, a roll call vote, please.
That's you.
Councilmember Hufty,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskell,
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wernicott,
Aye.
Mayor Alves,
Aye,
motion
Okay.
carries.
those pass. 3C, Craig, did you want to, or whoever has questions, Craig, do you want to start?
I think the comment from Ellen, I mean, that, or not Ellen, but from Karen makes sense. I read Ronnie's letter. So I think we should ask the staff to go back and look at the numbers and make sure they're correct. But if they are, then I think we should use the correct numbers.
Okay, Laura Russell, our planning director, is here. I thought we had addressed that comment in the response. Laura, do you want to elaborate on that?
We can certainly review the math in the way that Ronnie has calculated it and make that substitution if the council wants us to authorize to do so. There's different ways of looking, do you know what I mean, at the numbers, and if he's presented it in a way that benefits the town, we're happy to implement that.
Okay. What do you guys think? Do you want to, I'm trying to remember what the numbers were.
It brings it down about 5 percentage points.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was an interesting point, and I mean, if there's a couple different ways to skin the cat, perhaps they list both of them.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think it's worth at least adding it,
Okay.
augmenting.
Yeah, it's accurate. I would add it.
Okay, so I guess if we just take one more look at Ronnie's number along with the numbers that were in the staff report, and with that considered and amended, could we approve this?
I submitted a number of typos and things that.
Specifically for this?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have
they
those?
Get pulled. I thought it could at least make those changes.
We have
Mhm.
the typos and we'll certainly make the typo corrections. Councilmember Hufty also had a couple of word insertions that if you wish to pursue those, you should probably explain them to the full council and then the full council can integrate them.
Okay, let's see if I can do that. I may have a little trouble pulling this up, but I guess I can go your email. Talk about something else for a while. Lisa.
Okay, I have a question for Laura.
Go ahead.
Actually, two. One is big picture so that the public understands, and maybe it's for the town attorney, what the significance of this grand jury inquiry really is. How common are they? When you read it, it's alarming, but from what I gather, they're not so unusual. So can you put some context around it? Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the civil grand jury is an independent commission. It's authorized in our state constitution and has rules of procedure that are set out in the California Penal Code. The San Mateo County Grand Jury, I would say, is probably particularly active in terms of its the number of subjects that it investigates compared to other grand juries, I would say. They have very broad investigative authority, and they can make recommendations. But that's basically it. They can't make policy. So over the course of each year, I would say they actually have a really helpful website if you're interested in kind of the topics that they investigate. But they've investigated everything from bicycle safety to ransomware to public records. They're generally considered, local government watchdogs. So that's sort of the theme of their investigations. I believe there's one coming before council next month on bicycle safety. So that's a sort of a broad overview. This topic of ADUs, I think because it's coming at the same time that jurisdictions are trying to get their housing element certified, it's challenging. But every city and town in San Mateo County is required by state law to respond in a certain number of days. And so my understanding particularly with grand jury responses that have to do with planning issues, the cities and towns do collaborate and share information and resources so that they're generally on the same page in terms of their responses. Hope that's helpful. That was for me. Unless there's other questions on that, I had a more specific question for Laura to link.
Can I just follow up on that real quick?
Yeah.
So who sets their agenda?
They generally set their own agenda. They meet in private, in closed session, essentially. If you go to their website, they actually have a form you can fill out. If you are interested in a particular matter for them to investigate, you can make a request as a private individual. And you can also apply to be on the grand jury. So my question is more to link a reference that's high level to like something that we've discussed. So Laura, it's on the response to recommendations R1, the second paragraph, it says, Portola Valley is also supporting the development of a new ADU nonprofit that will have programs to incentivize. Just help me understand what that's referencing, given all the housing element stuff, because I think that phrasing is it wasn't intuitive what that was referencing there.
Sure, I'd
And
be
it
happy to. Yeah,
Thank you.
through 21 Elements and a collaboration with the county, 21 Elements is working on like an ADU center that is going to be inspired by the Napa Sonoma ADU Center, which has been very successful. It's a place where people can go as a first stop to get information about ADUs, understand the basics, get resources, get architectural plans at reduced rates, get, in some cases, free basic architectural plans that they can pursue, find architects, find contractors, get advice. And so the San Mateo County Collaborative has been working together to try to develop something similar in San Mateo County. It's not at the very beginning, it's kind of in the middle of the planning stages. So you can see in the responses here that it's anticipated to get going in 2024. So it's not something that I've brought to council specifically in the past in this level of detail before. It would likely help to satisfy some of the programs in our housing element that the town is required to implement once we're certified, and would be an opportunity to share resources. We don't know a lot yet about the very specifics of the costs and the timing, and it wasn't for this budget year. So I haven't brought the specifics to you, but it sounds like a really strong initiative that the town will be able to participate in coming years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mary, you had some changes.
I
Do you
have
wanna-
some things. So while the town counts ADUs under the town of Portola Valley, partially.
What page? Just start with what page you're on, just so we can follow along.
Well, it's one of the letter, and it's let's see, town of Portola Valley partially agrees with this finding.
Okay.
Does it have a number? No. Page 21.
Page 21 in the packet, yes.
Yeah. So while the town counts ADUs to meet affordable housing commitments in MENA, it has been suggested, I am suggesting, that we add the word some in front of ADUs because we don't count them all. It relies on several other strategies to realize to realize many of our required affordable units as opposed to affordable units. Those were two suggestions. There was also, and then down, what is the advantage of partially disagree? I, of course, was wondering why we would ever disagree with them. But it would states there that we are going to partially disagree with them. We're at, you're going to call that page 22. The town of Portola Valley partially disagrees. F3, yeah. While the town counts, okay, F3, let's thank you for your patience, everybody. I just didn't understand why we would disagree at all, or partially why we do it that way. Town land is prohibitively expensive, as are construction costs, just to add the obvious. And of course, the machine goes out. And then the next line, it says unstable soils. It says steep slopes, unstable soils, add flood risk and earthquake and wildfire hazard without an S. And then under opportunities to obtain tax credits for affordable housing projects is limited based on the town's location and available services, such as mass transit. So that those were the only additions that additional words that I had sent to Laura.
Okay, so
And also to, yeah, the typos.
Anyone want to comment on any of those? I think they're fine to me. We want to, Greg?
Well, I was gonna say the second set sounded fine. I wasn't quite sure what the.
Go
first
back to
set-
the first.
Well, it was just sort of, you were saying that you use some ADUs and then implied a bunch of other stuff. I mean, is the grand jury gonna know what that is?
I didn't reply anything. I just said, while the town counts some ADUs,
Right.
that's all, just added the word some. And then it relies on several other strategies to realize many of our required affordable units. That's
Okay.
all I added.
And we don't count all of them?
No, apparently not.
Okay.
Laura, you can contradict that if it's not true. I think we don't count them all because they're not obviously affordable, as they point out in this report.
Laura, did you want to comment on that?
I mean, I think there's different ways to read it, but I don't think the proposed changes make it inaccurate. I mean, I think, I don't read it as changing the level of accuracy.
Okay. Oh, can we accept both of those two she's made? Do you want to accept them both? Okay, and if we, with those changes, would we be comfortable approving the full letter versus the full response? Okay. Is there any more, is there any further public comment on this item? Okay, I don't see any hands up. So in that case, I could take a motion to approve the amended, the amended version with consideration of Ronnie Krasinski's comment regarding the quantification of the percentage of ADU.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay, need a roll call though?
Let's ask for roll call. Let's ask for a roll
Okay,
call.
call the roll, please.
Councilmember Hefty,
Here, yes, aye.
Councilmember Haskell,
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warnikoff,
Yes.
Mayor Alves.
Yes. Okay,
Motion stands.
Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the regular agenda, item 4A, update on housing element status and next steps. I believe this would be Laura. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. Let me share my screen. Okay, please let me know if there's any technical difficulties. It's sorry to have to be on Zoom instead of with you in person tonight. We're trying to be extra cautious because of a little COVID flare up for us. I'm here, as I often am, with Adrian Smith, our senior planner. So we wanted to provide you an update and make sure that the council and the public are aware of some recent developments related to the housing element and talk about next steps. So first, always a reminder that we have this list of the tables of the meetings and the links to all the different topics. So if people want to go back and look at things, this is a helpful way to do that, and includes some timestamps in the longer meetings as well. So we wanted to go back and make sure that everyone remembers and kind of aligned in their thinking. A lot has already happened since March 29th. So back on March 29th, the council took an important action of adopting the initial study in the mitigated negative declaration. We call that the ISMND, as well as the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. We call that the MMRP. And at that time, the council adopted an addendum to the MMRP and incorporated a couple of topics that were proposed by planning commissioners, Targ and Brothers, and were recommended up to the council from the Planning Commission. The council also committed to pursue what's been called the 7 requested mitigations that were provided by Woodside Fire Protection District. The council also clarified its intent to adopt the safety element by October 1st of this year, and also made a commitment to include measures in the new safety element that are at least as protective as those related to the 2010 safety element. This was related to specific policies, especially related to fire safety, as I understand it. The council also agreed to adopt the Moritz map and/or a successor map as the basis for evaluating fire risk that's associated with specific sites. Then on May 10th, the council adopted the housing element itself and also completed a self-certification table as a potential safeguard against the builder's remedy. Also at that time, you'll recall that the council adopted the conforming general plan amendments to ensure consistency with the rest of the general plan. So we took the comments that came from council, we compiled them into a new version of the housing element, which we made available online and sent off to HCD for their review. So we did receive a new HCD reviewer when we sent that in. This was not a big surprise to us. It is a disappointment. It's our understanding that a number of HCD employees have left HCD employment. You've also heard me say before that there's been a number of planning professionals that have also left employment in the course of this housing element process. So to say that it's been a challenge is certainly an understatement. One strong positive, in my view, about our new HCD reviewer is that she is also a supervisor. So she already has the authority to make some interpretations and to help us to really problem solve. So at least we are not going through 2 layers of people when we work with the new reviewer. It's also our understanding that she will continue to work with us through certification. She's been there quite a while, and we hope that she will continue to be there so we won't have another shift. She did acknowledge that the town's housing element is not typical and some creative thinking is necessary to be able to reach certification. So it was nice to have that acknowledgement. We did take the opportunity to explain some key constraints since she was new to the discussion. We especially talked about fire safety and geologic safety, the location of the fault, etc. We wanted to make sure that she had seen those portions of the housing element. And it did seem like she had done a thoughtful review in terms of understanding the background that we had provided to her. I do believe that the letter that we received is strongly worded, but I also think that they are very likely to use template language to save time. So they have a list of template language that they use for different comments, and they cut and paste it together. because when we got into the meeting with her, the tone was really quite different than the letter itself. She was very collaborative in her approach. She had some ideas of how to address some of the items, said that she would be willing to provide us some examples of what's been successful in other communities, and perhaps even draft some language to help us to meet the requirements. So I found it to be encouraging. I think our entire team did after having some nerves going into that meeting. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our preliminary thoughts, and I really want to emphasize that this is preliminary. So again, when we're talking about the technical team, I'm referring to our full-time staff for the town, Adrian and myself, Catherine now in our town attorney role, as well as our consultant team from Urban Planning Partners. So that's how I refer to our technical team. So we spent, just a 1-hour call with our reviewers so far. We have the experience of our consultants at Urban Planning Partners working on other cities also trying to get certified. And Catherine and myself have done some re-review of relevant laws to try to give us a basis for our initial understanding. And we think that there are 5 comments that have the most potential for policy implications and probably require the most effort to resolve them. And so these are listed in the staff report with the page numbers that correspond to the HCD letter. The first is related to the opt-in housing diversification program. This is a case where she I think is going to have some ideas for us about how to meet some of the concerns, but I think it's going to take some back and forth with her to really think it through. The next one is related to the availability of the zoning and the minimum density. And so this is a very complicated area of the state law. And so our reviewer is working with her team to confirm her interpretation. And our technical team is also working on this to make sure that we have a common understanding of what the law says, and then figure out what changes we may need to make from there. So we do not have any preliminary conclusions yet on this, but wanted everyone to know that this is one of the areas of a lot of difficulty in interpreting the law, and probably some more conversation has to be had with them. Next is related to ADUs. And so we have known that HCD was going to be looking for assurance if ADUs are not actually constructed and rented at the lower income categories. So that concept is not a surprise. We've been talking about that a lot, but the language that's in the letter seemed stronger than what we had anticipated related to this. So this is another item where I think we need to discuss further and better understand what they're looking for. But my takeaway here is that the proposed number of ADUs would be accepted if there's a program in place that would provide a backup. They refer to it as a backstop in some previous meetings, if those affordable units are not realized. And just as a quick reminder, the town is proposing a higher number of ADUs than is normally allowed through their basic formula. So they didn't tell us we couldn't have 92 ADUs. They just told us that we needed to have a stronger program if those ADUs are not built at an affordable level and made available at an affordable level. Next is related to Dorothy Ford Park and open space. And looking at that project, they're calling out the need for additional facilitation and support of that potential project. Important for us, the technical team, they didn't put into any doubt the feasibility of that site as a housing site, but instead we're talking about implementation and the need to strengthen that implementation. So this comment is perhaps not as bad as it seems when you first read it. Next is related to what we call AFFH, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. You all remember that this is a new set of laws that came into effect with this housing element cycle. The way that the comment is written, it comes off very strong, but in discussing it with her, She did note that there were many pieces that were included in our housing element, but that we probably needed to discuss them differently or group them or use different word choice or different program language. So she didn't imply that there would be a lot of new components here that would be required, that it may be more related to how we are presenting what we are already proposing, but still a little bit more discussion to be had about that. There's a number of other comments, of course. We've zeroed in here on the 5 that we think are most significant. And this is, again, based on such preliminary analysis. But since we only had an hour with her, we didn't have a chance to get into the others that we identified as potentially less significant in terms of level of effort to resolve. So our plan would be to get into those as well with her at upcoming meetings and then identify for the community anything that we think has policy impacts. So in terms of next steps, based on the level of collaboration in that first phone call, what we recommend is engaging in kind of a back and forth over kind of Zoom, phone, email process with our HCD reviewer so that we can receive her suggestions and discuss the specific comments and make sure we're getting down, what they really want to see and having a chance to talk with her about things that have policy impacts for us. We always have to talk about resources, and it's just not possible for staff to complete this work without consultant support. Urban Planning Partners, of course, has been in contract for our housing element and the ISM&D. Those 2 items are one contract with them. There's a separate contract related to the safety element, which does have funding in it, but the contract that we currently have for the housing element in ISM&D is depleted. We are out of funds under that contract. So what we recommend is that the council give us a preliminary authorization. We suggest the number of $30,000, but that is just a suggestion because we have not had an opportunity yet to develop a detailed scope of work and budget for this phase. So what we're thinking is that if the council supports us proceeding with this kind of back and forth with the reviewer and start working up some solutions, then you could approve some amount of money that they feel comfortable with this evening. Then we would develop a more detailed scope of work and budget for this phase, and then come back to the council with a formal contract amendment as well as a budget appropriation so that there could be formal approval of that. Then in terms of what would happen next, we would engage with this kind of back and forth with the HCD reviewer. We would start to formulate some approaches to satisfy those comments. And then we would engage with the Planning Commission for their review. And then that would be the opportunity for the public to really engage in that discussion and participate in making revisions to the housing element for future certification. So I want to remind everybody that both under state law and as well as under the town's practice, the Planning Commission is required to review these items before the town council takes action. We're here at the town council first, instead of going to Planning Commission, to inform the council and the community about where we're at and receive feedback related to additional funding for this work. And so the sausage grinding and the sausage making, as we often call it, would revert back to the Planning Commission according to our typical process. Of course, if the council wanted to see something different in the process, we'd be happy to receive that feedback and direction tonight. Next, I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about the integration of the Woodside Fire Protection District recommendations. So some of this is a reminder, some of it is new information. Back on March 29th, Woodside Fire Protection District submitted the 7 requested mitigations. So that came in on the day of the meeting. And so the council talked about it quite a bit on March 29th. And ultimately, after discussion, did include those 7 requested mitigations in the adopting resolution for the ISM&D. So the council has already indicated its support and commitment to investigate research, and implement as appropriate those 7 requested mitigations. As follow-up to that, town staff met with the fire district staff as well as their legal counsel to discuss how to implement the 7 requested mitigation measures. Several of the items on the list had a lot of legal kind of implications that we needed to tease out and understand what they were looking for. And so that meeting, we talked about some of those things and we asked them to put something in writing that would help us in the community and the council to understand what they hope to see. We received that letter from them on July 6th. I think it's just a little mistake. They didn't put a date on it. And so there's a letter in your packet from the fire district about the requested mitigations. We transmitted that to you the way that we received it, but just so that everybody knows, we got that on July 6th. And they did provide some additional guidance about how they wanted to see those mitigations implemented and talked about some of their own actions as well and upcoming work that they have. So for a next step, staff proposes to continue to coordinate with Woodside Fire Protection District and develop a work plan to implement those 7 requested mitigations. And so as staff has been thinking about this, a question that we have for council, and we would appreciate your direction, would it be useful for us in conjunction with the fire district to create one document that includes both the 7 requested mitigations as that came to us on March 29th, as well as what we've been calling the 13 key approaches to fire safety that came through the planning commission process from the fire marshal. There is some overlap between those 2 lists. And at this point, I don't know if it's useful to continue to have them to be separate. So it may be a good time to combine them, keep the source of where they came from, talk about who's responsible for implementing them, when they would be implemented, and really turn it into an actionable work plan. So we'd be happy to receive your feedback on that topic. These are a couple of just related updates and reminders for the council to be aware of as we talk about the housing element schedule and work plan. The builder's remedy is a big question mark. You've seen in the media that there's builder's remedy applications in some nearby communities. We have not received the builder's remedy application. But the best information we have available to us is that the town is susceptible to potential projects under the builder's remedy until the housing element is certified. As time goes on, we may see in other communities, we might see what happens with those builder's remedy projects. We might start to see, legally, how is this going to play out? But for now, we still don't have a lot of information about what this is going to mean. Next is related to the zoning code amendments that we have to do to implement the housing element. You'll all recall that the Planning Commission was well underway in this work in late 2022, but we paused in December to really focus on getting the housing element completed. But the Planning Commission had met several times and done quite a bit of work on that. And so we have worked with our zoning code consultant, which has been under contract for quite some time for this effort. And we are developing a more complete draft of all the things the Planning Commission has seen before, as well as some additional information that they haven't seen yet that's necessary technically. So we're working on those items to be ready to bring them forward to Planning Commission. And the zoning code amendments have to be completed by January of 2024 under state law. If the town would have adopted the housing element sooner, then this timeline would have been later. But this is one of those things in the law that if you don't comply, you start to see the consequences. So one of the consequences is we have to finish by January of 2024. There's some complexity about how we're going to complete the zoning code amendments and do the housing updates at the same time. So we're thinking about that on our side and happy to hear any thoughts or questions from the council on that. Then related to the safety element, this is just a reminder for everybody, the current version of the safety element is in effect right now while the town is working on a new draft. So it's not like we're in this interim period where nothing applies. Our current safety element still applies. And based on these moving parts and thinking through the housing element, we do anticipate that the adoption of the safety element will be delayed due to other town priorities and resource constraints. But if the council has any feedback or direction on that, again, happy to receive it. So this is just a summary of what we're requesting for you and any action that you may wish to take. We encourage you to ask questions, take public comment and provide any direction to staff on these topics. We'd be interested in your authority for additional funds to continue with the housing update work while we work on a scope and bring back a contract amendment. And if you have any thoughts or direction on coordination with the fire district on the 7 requested mitigations and maybe creating that single document with that and the 13 key approaches to fire safety. So that's what we have for you this evening in terms of our presentation. And we'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Laura. We'll start with council questions for staff. Mary, do you want to start with any questions you have?
I don't know how wonderful they are, but here they are. I guess the first is, could we have used the planning commission to help us be better prepared for this and other meetings? And is there a mechanism for them to get meeting again? And let me just put all my questions out there. Is it legitimate to ask the name of the reviewer that we're working with currently? Because I noticed that it was signed by Paul McDougall. And is it the same person that's working with Woodside right now? And then my fifth question was, what other cities are urban planning, are our urban planning consultants working with currently?
You want me to go ahead and answer those? Okay. I think your question was, could we have used the planning commission to be prepared? I don't think there was any way to be prepared for the HCD comments until we received them. Unfortunately, that's just not part of the system. We did request meeting with them during the 60-day review period that they're allowed under state law, but they did not take us up on that. So they did not make themselves available to meet with us during the 60-day review period. So there's really nothing we could do but wait.
That's the planning commission?
All of us.
Oh,
There's
HCD.
nothing we could do but wait until we got the HCD comments back. In terms of using the planning commission to move forward, that's fully the intent. Is that the planning commission would be the body, to hear recommendations from staff about how to meet the HCD reviewers' comments, what some options would be, how to make appropriate adjustments. So that's the goal. I think it's probably, a good moment for me to pause and kind of talk about the Planning Commission's role in general and why the Planning Commission hasn't been meeting. The Planning Commission has a specific role under state law and within our municipal code. So there are certain types of development projects that they review, and then they review any kind of legislative or policy action before it comes to the town council. And so on the last couple of months, just by chance, there have not been any development projects that require Planning Commission approval. They've all just been at the ASCC level. So nothing has bumped up to Planning Commission level because of, geologic conditions or the amount of grading or variance. We haven't received any of those kinds of applications lately. So the ASCC is doing their normal work, but nothing's gone up to Planning Commission. And then related to legislative or policy related work, we have been working on the technical aspects of the zoning code amendments, but they have not been ready for the Planning Commission to review quite yet. We've been getting close, but not ready. So quite literally, there are not items for the planning commission to review that are within their legal purview. The council can delegate other items to the planning commission if you wish them to work on other items, but that just hasn't been the case for the last couple of meetings. Next was the reviewer on our letter. Paul McDougall is the person that signs all of these. He's the supervisor. And so that's what he signs all of them. So all the cities, to my knowledge, have Paul as a supervisor, certainly at least in our region. The reviewer is the one that's referenced on like above the signature. And so her name is Sohab Mahmood. She is our reviewer and the supervisor that's overseeing our housing element now. And I don't know who Woodside's reviewer is. I believe there's changed also. And I don't know who their reviewer is at this time. And then I think the last question was related to Urban Planning Partners and what other cities they're working on. I can't speak to their whole firm, but the people that are working with us directly have been working on the Paradise housing element, the Saratoga housing element, and the Antioch housing element. Does that answer your questions?
Thank you very much. That's excellent.
Great.
Craig, would you like to go next?
So I guess my questions are a little bit just on the individual items. So on the opt-in, is that something we could potentially replace with SB9? Did you get a sense when you were talking with the reviewer? Just do a straight up substitution and add all that opt-in stuff is just SB9?
I think it's unlikely because HCD previously has given guidance on how to count SB9 units. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before. They have a very strict methodology. And so we don't have any track record right now of SB9 units that have come through building permit application. I believe that we have one that project has gone through ASCC, but a building permit has not been issued. So we technically have zero track record of SB9 units. Alternatively, they require people to do a detailed site analysis where you actually analyze every parcel and figure out whether it's likely an SB9 unit could be constructed there. So to my knowledge, no city or town in San Mateo County has included SB9 units as units that they expect to get in their sites inventory.
Okay, so then did you get a sense from the reviewer what they were looking for in the opt-in?
It's hard to tell so far. Yes, we got some sense. She had concern particularly about the cap and the interaction between the cap and the state law that talks about limiting housing, SB 330. And so we really have, I think, follow-up conversation to do with her to help her understand the difference between this and SB 9 and the fact that property owners would still have the right to do SB 9 projects, that this is just something that's additive. So I think we would have to convince her that, the cap is not an impediment to housing development, the way that the state law describes it.
Okay, got it. And then do you have just an example of an ADU backstop? I mean, what do these backstops look like?
I think ultimately what they would really want to see is that if the ADUs don't materialize in the lower income levels, that there would be either housing sites that would be feasible to build affordable housing or other like intensive commitments to physically construct affordable housing units. So we don't know how far we're going to have to go to meet that. And we really have some questions for them about their authority to do that. How far does their authority stretch to require something that intensive? So that's,
Right, yeah,
I think, the discussion we need to have with them.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's what and it also seems it sort of interacts with the buffer. Because I thought that was the point of the buffer, was to try to capture the fact that not all of this stuff was going to work. So instead of doing the 253, we did 315 or whatever for that reason, right? So it sort of almost sounds like double counting to me.
Yeah, and there's always a discussion about what counts, you know what I mean, as part of the buffer conversation. Most of the time, we don't consider ADUs as part of the buffer conversation.
Okay. So then on the safety element, housing element sort of interactions, will we continue to work on the safety element while working on the housing element? And what I'm trying to characterize here is I'm trying to get a sense for what the safety element delay might be, since that's obviously been something that, you know, we all consider critical for the town.
It's very hard for me to estimate at this time because we're still kind of working on the work program related to the housing element updates. So I think we would need probably at least one more meeting with our reviewer. Additional analysis from our technical team to really see where we're at, come up with a work plan to move forward, and then see how we can fit any safety element work in with that. If the council wanted us to have a different priority in terms of what we were working on, then we would need to hear that from you, because my assumption coming in is that your priority would be on the housing element certification. So if that's not the case, we would need to know if you wanted us to really be focused on both things concurrently, even if the housing element takes a little longer.
Right, and if we did that, that would expose us to builder's remedy for a longer period of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
okay.
we need to make sure we're done with everything by January of 2024, because the zoning code has to be finished by then.
And if we don't get approval from HCD by January 2024, like, how does all this stuff play against each other?
I don't know if anybody really knows. I don't know if Catherine has had a chance to think that far down the line, but each time we don't meet a deadline, it gets worse. We just don't know how much worse and what penalties are really going to realize.
But the zoning changes are, I mean, those are within our control.
Right.
I mean, HCD, we could have zoning in place in January and still not have an approved housing element, just to be clear. Is that correct?
Yeah, they have to be consistent. So the council would have to, we would have to still potentially adopt a housing element and zoning code amendments that are consistent with one another, even if that housing element is not certified. And then if additional changes are necessary, then you might have to redo those zoning code amendments. Based on what's proposed, I don't think it's that likely. Do you know what I mean? That there would be big inconsistencies from what we know right now. But technically that is possible.
Okay, good. Because my understanding is that, I mean, once you pass zoning, it's hard to unpass it. Like you can add to it, but it's hard to sort of take it back. Is that the right way to think about this?
Yeah, I think you're referring to, there's a state law that has gone into effect that basically says once you upzone something, you can't downzone it again, or you can't just downzone property because you want to. So that is a true constraint. So that's one, that may be what you're thinking about.
Right. So if we were to take our housing element, do the zoning to the best of our ability, and then HCD came back with something else, we might end up zoning for things that disappear because HCD didn't approve them. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand kind of, as my young friends would say, this sounds like a hot mess, right? But I'm just trying to better understand the interaction of these pieces.
What you're suggesting is technically possible. I think it is probably unlikely based on what's included in our housing element and what we think the comments are right now.
Okay, great. Okay, and then the last question is on the 7 requested mitigations and the 13 key approaches. Is this something that should sort of get folded into the safety element process? I'm trying to understand, you sort of made a request of, would it be useful to try to bring these things together? And I guess what I'm wondering is, does it make sense to try to bring them together underneath the sort of umbrella of the safety element work?
I think that's a good question. I think that the 7 mitigation requests and the 13 key approaches are, I mean, I would characterize them as a very high priority, and I think that that's the direction that I've gotten from the council in the past. And so I think it's appropriate for whatever work that can continue on those to continue. Especially if we're in the position that we're going to wait a little bit longer on the safety element. There are some things there that can inform the safety element. There's also several items in there that are actually within the purview of the fire district. And so we want to just make sure everybody understands who's supposed to be doing what. And I don't think we want to wait too long in doing that. So I don't know if I'm answering the way that you were thinking or if I'm answering the
Well, I guess
opposite
what
way.
I was trying to get to, so certainly the 7 requested mitigations, I completely agree. There's no reason we shouldn't start working on them sort of tomorrow, right? We've agreed we're going to do them. We agreed we're going to do it as part of the ISM&D. I was trying to understand, you were asking about sort of combining the 7 with the 13 and coming up with a, I guess, a more consistent or coherent document. And I guess that's what I was trying to understand is what's the value of putting effort into that? Because I mean, we got a lot of things to do here. So I was just trying to understand what value we were going to get from doing that and whether it was value toward the safety element or actually was direct value in what we're trying to do with the housing element.
The council has also committed to the 13 key approaches. So you have already committed to both as part of the housing element adoption process. In my mind, the value is bringing them together because I think they are really important public safety priorities. And I think it would be helpful for the community to know which ones the town is working on and which ones the fire district's working on and kind of what are the timelines for those and what might people expect. I just see a lot of value in that just from a pure public safety point of view. But that's just, you know what I mean, my opinion, my professional opinion for your consideration. It's really your judgment.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. So, okay, but I think that helps me understand. So the idea is to bring all this stuff together, put it in a more coherent document. So we're really clear what our public safety issues are going forward.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And we're just doing questions now, right? And then we'll circle back. Got it. So on the opt-in, my recollection is rough, but I thought that it might have been in part to address the cap issue that we were putting it in the housing element rather than zoning. Is that accurate? And is that a part of this discussion with HCD? Like, is that going to be something to pull out and reanalyze? Because to me, it's very concerning that we have an opt-in program that now might apply town-wide when we were trying to, you know, apply nice new ideas in a experimental way. So the way we were doing it, I thought was intended to address a cap argument, and yet it seems like we're there addressing the cap argument.
I agree with you. We did construct it that way because we were aware of some of these issues. What we're proposing is unconventional. You know, they've never seen this before. This is a program that the town created through this process. And so when we explained to her what we were trying to achieve and kind of described it more, you know, like a pilot program, something that we wanted to try it and see if it worked and see what the results were. I think she understood it better. And so I could kind of see her wheels turning a little bit, like maybe there was another way to frame this that could meet the council's intent and not push up against the law. So I think that's the conversation to have. So yeah, we tried to do it consistently with the law. She didn't really see it, but she might still see it through additional discussion.
Yeah. And by that question, I was like, we were actually trying to clear a path toward this that made a lot of sense. So hopefully we can convince her. In the budget preliminary authorization, I'm not quite sure what we would be doing if we gave you preliminary authorization. And I certainly understand that we have to work and do some work and ask our partners to do estimates, help us work up a work plan. But is the 30,000 just to talk about what they're going to do, or is the 30,000 to do that and then take a few steps? Because I feel uncomfortable just saying, yeah, 30. I have no basis on which to peg that. So if you can help me understand what that would be and the legal implication of a preliminary authorization. I don't know what exactly that is.
So this is us trying to choose a number that might get us to completion. Okay, I don't know that for sure. This is definitely much more than developing a work plan, do you know what I mean, and starting a little bit of work. And so I think this could get us all the way, but we wanted a little bit more time to really think about it, and it really might be less. You know, we got to think about an approximate number of meetings and, you know what I mean, planning commission meetings and things like that to work it through, and a schedule to do that. What I wanted to avoid, the council will recall when we came back to you and asked you for contract amendments for housing element related work that was kind of like cleanup, where the council had previously given authorizations, but we didn't have the capacity to do the formal amendments. So the council had approved it and then we had to kind of clean it up later. I just wanted to have a more transparent conversation, especially in light of current town budget issues. So I just pinned a number that I think we might be able to finish this in that number. If you feel more comfortable authorizing a much smaller number, I would certainly understand, and we can talk about what that might be to get us going on preliminary steps.
Okay. And the legal.
I'll just add, and I think Laura did make this point, but the formal contract amendment and budget authorization would come back at a future meeting. And I don't know, Laura, if it'd be ready for the first meeting in September, but that would, you know, that would be the opportunity for council then to see the exact number, which could be a little bit, you know, less than 30,000 or potentially a little bit more, but we'll have a precise amount then.
Yeah, and that's our intention, to be able to bring it back at the first meeting in September. So we would be working towards that, you know, and just ask for a little understanding if we're not able to.
So are we just being asked, like, this is sort of a ballpark and are we comfortable with it so that you can go put together a more formal request?
Yes, that's a way to look at it. And also, because I would like to have the consultants working now, you know, so that we can arrange more meetings with HCD. We can have them, you know what I mean, bringing forward more ideas and materials. And right now, I don't have the authority to even meet with them right now, because the contract is really like literally out. We're in the last couple of $1,000s.
All right. On the other jurisdictions, I know these responses are rolling in and every jurisdiction is different. But in terms of the moving goalposts, the template language, if you're tracking this, is our response kind of having common elements like that? I'm just kind of curious what's going on in the big picture here.
Yeah, I agree. I've only talked to a couple of colleagues about their specific example so far. And a couple people have had a similar situation where they got a really harsh letter and then got in with their reviewer and were able to resolve some things pretty quickly. So I'm hoping we've kind of fallen into that category. I did reach out to 21 Elements and ask to initiate a meeting on this topic, which they did. So we have a 21 Elements meeting, I believe next week, to hear from everyone else that's having trouble getting certified and why, and see if we've got some common factors or we can learn from each other. So that more information is coming from our colleagues, but I don't have it yet. And I suspect people are having similar problems. And I suspect it's because so many HCD employees quit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to know we're checking in with others. Those are my questions for now. I'll have comments later.
Vice Mayor?
First on the reviewer, Laura, I know, you know, even back, you know, several years ago at the beginning of the ad hoc housing element committee meeting, we had reviewers that came into town, somebody I think you thought was going to be a reviewer. They drove around town with you. They had a great feel. I know that you had a great relationship with our previous reviewer. Do you have any sense of how much of that background and information has been shared with the new reviewer? Or is that, we just don't know and it could just be all lost at this point?
I think the supervisors have been coordinating. I think the individual reviewers, like when we did that tour around town, I think those people are all gone. They were not supervisors, they were just reviewers. My observation right now is the supervisors have stayed the same. And so I think it is likely that information was passed from one supervisor to our current reviewer, but I'm not sure. And it wasn't totally apparent in our meeting with her. But when I tried to emphasize some of our physical and safety constraints, she did not seem like surprised by that information. She did seem a little surprised by the level of public participation we have already had. So it may be, that she didn't read all of the attachments because there's tons of attachments and some of that information is in there. But she did seem to have a handle on like our constraints section that talks about, our physical and safety constraints.
Thank you. And can you remind me, what is the time? I know where we are with zoning, we have a deadline in January, but what is the timeline for this current phase that we're in for the turnaround of this, where we are right now with HCD?
We are outside of what some people have called the grace period. So we are outside that. So we are just in kind of a no man's land. There's not a name for where we are. And, all the other cities and towns are in the same place around us. So we're in this phase that we need to work with HCD to resolve these issues. And, we haven't asked them yet, like, what is the formal process going to be to get the certification? So that's something we'll have to ask in an upcoming meeting. But we really, for kind of the reasons we were talking about before, we want to do it as quickly as we can because of the consequences that are out there and the question marks around builder's remedy. But really having to complete, to me, like the next hard deadline is January of 2024 when the zoning has to be done.
Okay. So there's no, I'm beating a dead horse here, but there's no like 30 days, 60 days right now from them getting this letter to us that we need to get back to them. It's pretty much open.
It's open.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to confirm that. I have some specific questions about the response letter and then about the Woodside Fire letter. So back to the opt-in. Did you get, when I read through this, I was thinking, is she thinking that she wanted us to keep this open indefinitely? Was that something you got a sense of, or, if they didn't like a cap, what were they looking for? Or she just didn't understand it really. She was just kind of warming up to the idea because it was a pilot.
Yeah, she didn't understand it at first. I talked to her about the process of how we got there. Then she was more open to it and more understanding about the intention of the cap. But I think there's just some more work to do before we can tell.
Okay.
I think when we talked about it as a pilot program, she felt a lot more comfortable in using our general plan authority as opposed to our zoning authority to do that. So
Okay.
she's kind of trying to see how it can fit into the laws. But I think my observation was she was kind of trying to put the puzzle pieces together to see if she could make it work. She wasn't trying to not make it work.
Okay, good. On the approval process, I'm a little confused on the language around zone within 3 years. Can you just talk to me about that? It says zone, this is within opt-in approval process. Does it imply that we would have to have these projects zoned within 3 years? Because I'm assuming, will we zone as we go? I just don't understand how that timeline fits into this program.
I think we can resolve this one with her. Not sure yet, but I think so because she didn't understand that it would be a general plan. It would be a general plan authority to do this, that it wouldn't take rezoning.
Okay.
And so I think those comments are going to change now that she understands it better.
Okay. Moving on, I'm now on page 110. The local process and permit procedures, ASCC. Can you just explain to me in layman's terms, was this a significant change? And, what were they asking here? What were they asking for here with this request?
This is, I think this is actually a follow-up to previous comment that we got. And so I think that's one statement I would make. It's like, not all of these things are new. Okay. And I know it kind of feels that way, but a lot of them are actually based on the information that we gave them when we resubmitted, or they asked us for something and they weren't satisfied, and now they're asking us a different way. And so one of the things that we have to do is demonstrate that our local processing is not a hindrance to the development of housing. So the way that we've written it is not good enough. It's not totally clear what they're looking for in terms of the process. This might be an area where I felt like they might be overreaching a little bit, and we want to talk to them more in terms of how the state laws are written, because we know we have to comply with the state law, but the way she was describing it made it sound like she was maybe pushing a little past the state law. So we need to make sure that we can come into a conversation with her and, really have a handle on the town's rights to have a discretionary process in certain cases, or when can we only use objective standard review, and get into that conversation with her. So I don't know if it's a real policy question yet. It might be an issue of wording or semantics.
Okay. My next question might be more a case of, as you were saying, they cut and paste a bit, but in housing programs B, item 1, the second paragraph, it says the element does not include a complete site analysis, and then it goes on about that. They also mention that up above. And so, I mean, what's the implication of that whole section right there?
They said this in the last letter too. This
Yeah.
is just what they always say to cover themselves if there's a missing piece.
Okay.
Because technically to them, legally, we don't have a complete site analysis because every little box isn't checked yet. So that's the last box to come off the list, basically.
Okay. Thank you. My next questions have to do with the Woodside Fire letter. And I want to be careful not to blur comments and questions here. So Mayor, perhaps you tell me how you want me to handle this. I have clarifying questions about the Woodside letter that.
Clarifying question.
Okay. So they're not, I guess my question is, there's a lot of comments within this letter. There's language that references a successor map, establishing a map. There's a variety of different times that they reference all the different maps. And I find it confusing to figure out where they're talking about Flame Mapper, CAL FIRE, or something else that we don't know what it is yet. And I'm just, in addition to your suggestion about the 13 key approaches and the 7 mitigations, to me, I'm wondering if it's appropriate, number one, I would say on that, I'm asking, would it be appropriate to ask Woodside Fire to take the lead on the consolidation of those 2 documents and synthesize them, because they were originally their documents? So maybe let me ask that pointed question. Or what was your vision?
I think that is an appropriate request. It can be handled different ways, right? Either the town can lead and the fire district can provide comments, or the fire district can lead and the town can provide comments, because we want to make sure we have a shared understanding of these things. But all of these items fundamentally came from the fire district, either formally in writing or kind of informally with me as the fire marshal and I were preparing for the February Planning Commission meetings. And so these are the things that I understood to be his priorities. You know what I mean? He vetted them. We talked about all of them together. But in that case, I was sort of the lead on that part. And then he was the lead on the 7 mitigation measures. And so if the, council wants to provide a preferred direction, that would actually be really helpful. Then I could go back to the fire district and ask them. It was the council's request for you to consolidate these and certainly be a partner in that. But happy to receive any direction. And I think any direction like that would be appropriate.
Okay. And then in the letter, moving on to the letter now, in the letter, there's references to the creation of a WUI. Do you have a understanding of what the steps are for that? Or is that a question that we should ask? What's entailed in that? And, or is that a better question for Woodside Fire Protection District?
I can tell you very broadly, but the specifics are really best for the district. And the creation of the WUI as it's being used here, because people use the term WUI different ways, but the way they're using it in this letter does have a specific meaning. And the way of creating the WUI in the past has been from the CAL FIRE very high fire severity zone maps. So that has been the method in the past. That is the default method under state law right now, is for the CAL FIRE maps to come out and then all the cities and towns to adopt them, and then all of the fire departments and districts to implement according to that. The fire district has been working on some of their own mapping initiatives that may replace, augment, you know what I mean, have a different function. We're not sure yet. So my understanding of their language is that they were still keeping this open, that it might be a map that was produced by them for this purpose, or it might be the CAL FIRE map, or maybe potentially some third option. But that's why I think they are using this language when they're talking about that they're in the process of establishing a wildland urban interface, the WUI.
Okay. I think my others get too much into comments, so I'm going to hold them. So just one last more on mitigation 6. I just want to confirm, I'm assuming this is the same as Councilmember Taylor's memo, and that it was just a time lapse that they're referring to here.
That's also my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I have one question. They talk a bit about the Ford Field implementation, and it sort of reads just like they kind of want us to dot the i's and cross the t's on that. Was there any mention from the reviewer of any sort of, do they want any more timeline details on that?
I think that the reviewer didn't understand that when this project goes forward, it would really be a collaboration between the town and an affordable housing developer to ensure, from a town's point of view, we want to make sure that the town's objectives are all, achieved because it's so important. But I think she was picturing it like it would just be another project in the queue. And so I explained to her, I was like, no, this would be the biggest and most important thing that would be going on in town, and it would receive lots of time and attention. And you know what I mean? It's not like we would just put it in the stack and process it whenever we got to it. So I think that that helped. And I think she is looking to strengthen some of that language, but she did not say that the timing needed to be sooner. So this is something that we were really listening for because of the council's interest and the community's interest in the sunrise concept. So she did not say that the timelines needed to be sooner. She was just saying that our funding and our process needed to be a little bit more specific.
Okay, thank you. And then we've talked a little bit about builder's remedy. Have there been other consequences out there? In past cycles, there have been lawsuits filed by housing advocates. Have we heard any of that in other jurisdictions that are past the in the same spot as us?
So my observation of the housing advocate community right now is that they are focused on the people who are really not trying to do the work, not trying to comply with the law. or continuously submitting new versions that don't change anything. And so that's my observation of where they are focused. I would be surprised, honestly, at this point, if we kind of continue to try to do this, if we had housing advocates come after the town soon. I would be surprised by that.
Good to hear. Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes our questions. We can now take public comment on this item. You can raise your hands here in the schoolhouse. You can raise your hands on Zoom. I see 2 hands on Zoom. I'll start with those. Rita Combs, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. Yeah, there's a lot of information here, which still surprises me that the planning commission meetings have been canceled because the safety element is still moving forward, and I believe the planning group is part of that. I'm also concerned about the urban planners because perhaps we should look into what group that Redwood City had to make theirs go through, because if we're using the same team to do the same thing, I don't need to do the next sentence, but perhaps we should look into this. And when like I mentioned earlier about the finance meeting, there was, we're at a severe deficit right now because of the type of spending and not really accounting for what different contractors were actually doing. So I asked the council to please, by blanketing an approval for these, please let's put some restrictions in these approvals for contractors, because we're still at a deficit and we're still 3 years behind in our audits and our financial numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Carolyn Vertonghen has her hand up. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Great, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I really appreciate the questions that the new council members have asked. I might be blunt, but let me give you a perspective. You remember that the documents that was submitted to ACD was flawed. Many residents spent hours and time with very substantiated presentations and asked the previous town council to change the documents, and they didn't. So yes, we have a mess. But like I tried to say in oral communication, and obviously we had a problem, there is such an energy in Portola Valley because the residents are committed to find solutions. And we hope that town council will use every effort and energy and time from local residents to find these resolutions. We have many experts in our town. On the grand jury experts, these reports are very informative, and I have been following them, and I can even provide you. There's some grand jury reports showing that even our fire district or our public school district did not comply with the recommendations. So that is something to keep in mind. The housing and safety element, we keep on funding them. We have not received any updates. ACD has been in trouble for so many years. And I think the questions of the town council members who said, who is this reviewer? If you have worked with government officials, they come and go. And it's not necessarily because they have been promoted to a supervisor position that they're knowledgeable. So I really would like this committee to invest the time and really research who are reviewers. We constantly hear the uncertainty or the changes from staff. I understand they do their best, but I would like this town council to use residents and the provisions that we have. We have several members on committees who are experts and who are willing to provide their time. So please, like many members have asked today, ask the Planning Commission to be involved in this decision-making. You have the resources. Please use your residents. Staff comes and goes. All they want is a raise and they want their money, you know. They're not consistent. They don't help us. So please help the resources that you have and provide the best solution for our community. We are here to stay. We invested in our community and we would like to help you make the right decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands on Zoom. Linda had her hand up. And Bob.
My name is Linda Brothers. And I'm speaking as a member of the public based on what was in the package we received. And Laura, I realize you were involved in a god-awful negotiation with HCD, and I wouldn't want to be in your position for anything. But I guess I have a question. Reading their letter where they quote different parts of the code, and then they turn around and make that a requirement, it raises in my mind, and this is really a question for our lawyer, what constitutes substantial compliance? We only need to have substantial compliance to get this element approved. And I noticed a couple of places, and this will be a general comment for now, but where the code would say you may or you could, and then they turn around and say you must or we require. And that clearly is more than substantial compliance. Substantial compliance can arguably be 50%. So I know that's a more specific sort of a legal situation, but I don't know to what extent that can help in this negotiation. And it bothers me a lot, what looks to me like overreaching by HCD. And I'll discuss it more when it comes to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Bob, go ahead.
I missed you guys. We got to be so close so often.
Bob,
Closer?
just to make sure people can hear you.
I need Mary to help me. A couple things, and I think you guys are probably already doing this. I'm just asking you to think about it a little bit. And that is, we have some sort of a critical path that we're on in order to get this done. And when we did this last time, when we finally got it approved May 10th, we started doing meetings every 2 weeks, or at least you scheduled them every 2 weeks. And I think in this case, you may want to do that just for a critical path issue, for instance, the contract for 21 elements. I miss it. Okay. For 21 elements, I'm just thinking if that's an impediment to get the thing through quicker, then maybe you just want to have one special meeting to deal with that just so it gets done. And my question really has to do with doing the critical path and trying to get this done before January 31st. There's no other commitment than trying to think about how do we organize this so it's as short a time as possible. And I, like many, are concerned about builder's remedy. So whatever we can do to get that back under control, that would be great. And I thank you very much. And it's nice seeing you again.
Thank you, Bob. Betsy had her hand, then Karen, and then Randy.
Hello again. Betsy Morgan Taylor here. Don't worry, these are not my responses. I want to begin with just a general remarks and conclude with a question as there's time. For HCD, the result of RENA 6 has been a dramatic need to hire many more staff to handle the enormous statewide workload. And even so, they're evidently seriously understaffed. Add to the significant turnover Director Russell referenced earlier tonight is the number of HCD directives that have moved. And dealing with a moving target has been enormously costly and dispiriting to the town. And I imagine to Director Russell. As Director Russell mentioned earlier, I think it important to understand the authority of HCD reviewers. They're evidently not staff of long standing, and whether their creeping asks and positions are well grounded in the law is a real question, as I heard Linda Brothers mention earlier. Then their slow turnaround, taking 7 months cumulatively to respond to our 3 drafts, is punishing us. HCD's analytical requirements have increased exponentially, resulting in staff like everyone relying on beaucoup to outside consultants for each and every draft, and that's come as a significant cost. So I hardly need to share with you, especially with a significant burden that poses to us, to our budget, to our financial position. If someone were to ask me whether this process felt like working with an IRS, working through an IRS audit, I'd say, no, it doesn't. It feels more like negotiating an amateur hostage situation. My request of the council is to in turn request financial staff to keep a separate account of costs the town has borne in assembling what will now be 4 serious-minded draft responses to HCD. I started a quick back of the envelope tally about a year ago, and it was already sky high, but I'd like a really professional accounting of that I think we can put to good use as time comes. And now if time remains, I have a specific question for one of you, if you know it. Thank you. For one of you, if you know, or Director Russell, which is whether you can interpret the following sentence, top of page 6. Additionally, since the town, this is from the letter, additionally, since the town failed to adopt a compliant housing element within 120 days of the statutory deadline, that being January 31st, 2023, rezones to accommodate RENA must be completed no later than 1 year from the statutory deadline. And my question is it your understanding that this applies to the gateway to the Ford open space and would put into question our post-adoption plan? Thank you for your extra time here.
Thank you. Karen, and then Randy and Rusty.
Thanks. I sent a letter yesterday pontificating and responding to the written comments from HCD. So Laura, I'm actually very pleased to hear that you had a much more positive, collaborative conversation, and to use those conversations to educate HCD on the uniqueness of Portola Valley and all of our constraints. So thank you for doing that. I did have a question on the submission time, and in terms of what should we expect in this next round? How long is it going to take HCD to respond? So if we submit something on October 15th, do we need to wait another 60 days? Because that obviously factors into our timeline. Another question I have for Laura is just better understanding. I know you answered the SB9 question, is how many ADUs and JADUs apps have we had to date? Not necessarily permits, but what's in the pipeline? And my other question is when I read the HCD comments, I got the impression, and because JADUs are less than 500 square feet and with an internal to a existing residence, and HCD even mentions multiple JADUs in one resident and spreading the units across town. They wanted to see more across town than in one section. I am wondering if we were to split out the JADU projection, if those could all be viewed as low income or very low income, is to just kind of take that angle. So that's one question I have. We've covered a lot of the other things. I just wanted to say that I too am in favor of pushing back on the state and aligning ourselves with like communities. So let's try to explore those options, please. And with respect to the opt-in, if we can't get that capped I think we need to look at alternatives and perhaps JADUs could be what we do there if we can't do SB9s. And I also read into this that I thought HCD valued senior communities. That was one of the, I won't call it, what do they call it? Special needs populations. And I just want to throw out the idea that perhaps we think about if, and we have to use Ford Field, we look at a seniors community, an additional one, because we have a graying population and it's a great way to welcome new members into our community, and it won't take up a lot of traffic and parking issues and things like that. I also would love to see us use our affordable housing fund to maybe purchase land so that we can control it, just like we can control Ford Field. And I think we need to think seriously about soliciting donations or contributions to get that affordable housing fund up as high as we can possibly get it. And I think I'll stop there because you can all read my letter, but thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you, Karen. Randy?
All right, this one. Thank you, Randy True. The night before the May housing element meeting, I called someone I'm close to who's the chief of staff of one of the legislators who's one of the co-architects of this wave of housing laws. And I said that we were voting on the housing element. It was actually in the afternoon tonight. And I said, what's our situation? This is such a difficult position for Tola Valley. And he said, your collateral, is it not, that's really not close enough?
Yeah.
Oh, you can't hear me, okay. So he said, okay, he said, this mic is difficult. We should get this one working. Okay, so, but this is important because what he said is, your town is collateral damage. And he explained this is a political process. And I described some of our efforts. And I was a couple of weeks later after housing element was passed, I was speaking to someone who's also very close to this process in town, really knowledgeable, who thought our housing element was going to get approved by HCD because they would want to show that they approved a housing element of an affluent community. That didn't seem commensurate with the political situation in the state. And I think we're seeing that play out in this response. And I think we've heard a positive spin from the reviewer. And I mean, I don't doubt that she was nice and said some of the things that Laura said, but I just have a hard time having confidence that this process is going to lead to something that we recognize in town as something we can live with. We tried to do these adjustments, but I would propose that we do seriously consider an alternative track. And in that alternative track, and the mayor had asked me personally what that was, that should happen, that could happen in a meeting and where it's given serious consideration. And I think that serious consideration could and should include a comprehensive analysis. And again, I'm running out of time because there's not even enough time to talk about this. I've shared some ideas with the new council members about a comprehensive probability of development approach. And I don't fully, I mean, as much as I don't like the housing elements, and they're a completely coercive overstepping and possibly unconstitutional by the state, I think we should adopt a stance of attempted good faith compliance, but bounded by the fire and seismic safety issues and bounded by the social contract of our citizens, which we live in an inherently low density community. That is our social contract. And none of that's coming across in the deliberations on this housing element. So I propose that we consider an alternative and give voice to the alternative serious voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Rusty, next, and then Helen.
Trustee Day, I think it's critically important that you be very clear-sighted and hard-headed about the deficiencies of this housing element that HCD points out in the letter. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to go through one. HCD rejected our housing element because it did not contain an inventory of all sites that are suitable and acceptable for development of the dense housing HCD requires. The government code requires that inventory. This is not a precatory this is a shell requirement of the government code. Include an inventory of all sites. We didn't do that. Instead, what we did is we submitted a housing element premised on the false premise, the dangerous premise of the CAL FIRE map, that 94% of Portola Valley is not in very high fire hazard severity and has no hazard. The fire department wrote you on January 4th, whether you wanted to hear it or not. They sent you the mitigations they wanted on January 4th, whether you wanted to hear it or not. They told you on January 4th that the housing element was built on a false and dangerous premise because you weren't using the Moritz map. And they asked you to use the Moritz map, which shows 40% of town is very high hazard and 49% is high hazard. That constrains what land is available for development in this town. By state law, land in very high fire hazard severity zones cannot be developed except in accordance with CAL FIRE's fire safe development standards. You haven't adopted those. The fire district has urged you to adopt and implement the Moritz map, adopt and implement the CAL FIRE's minimum safe fire regulations, amend them for dense housing requests where parties want to, irrespective of the regulations, go greater with density, amend the regulations to address that. Those are the mitigations that the fire district has asked for. You now have a choice. You have until the end of January to submit a compliant housing element and a zoning plan. Are you going to come clean and acknowledge the hazard and risk in this town as the fire district and hundreds of residents in this town have urged you to do? Or are you going to persist in the housing element that you submitted, which doesn't depict any hazard or risk in this town? That's the choice that you have. You have 5 months to make that choice. We've offered you a solution. Adopt the mitigations, implement them now, identify the hazards and the risks, adopt the constraints that go with those hazards and risks to make sure that when you submit an inventory of all land in town that is suitable and available for development at the end of January, it accurately reflects the hazards of that land, the risks associated with it, and the constraints that should go on development in areas of very high and high hazard. That's what I urge you to do. Let's save a lot of consternation and get on with honest, clean government. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen Walter.
Hi, good evening. Helen Walter, not speaking for my boss, representing myself as protected under the First Amendment. I just wanted to bring up the JADU issue of the restriction of 500 square feet. For instance, if we are going to rely on ADUs, which the town, I know many people want to rely on ADUs, even though the grand jury has concerns about that route. The constraints, for instance, I have a room I would love to turn into a JADU that is larger than 500 square feet. The 1,200 square foot restrictions under SB 9 and for ADUs to fit a 3-bedroom, 1 bath under 1,200 square feet is very restrictive. I realize you would need to open up the ADU code as well to change that, but as long as you're changing zoning, and if you really want ADUs to be a route, it should definitely be a consideration to consider more to allow private property less restriction. And the reason, that you have had very few SB 9s is that 1,200 square foot restriction as well. So if you are looking for routes to, to certification, I would definitely look at those aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Christy Corley has her hand up on Zoom. Christy, go ahead.
Thank you. Just some comments. I think the planning department needs to focus on both the housing element and the safety element, as they both go hand in hand. Can you request our new HCD reviewer to visit our town to fully understand our safety and evacuation limits in our town? I think this is extremely, extremely important. I appreciate Craig's question regarding SB9 units. I believe that many cities and towns in California, in fact, Southern California is a year ahead of us, have included SB9 units to be included in their housing element. And SB9 law is a law and now, and it will be utilized in the next 8 years. We can't leave this number at 0. I believe lot splits in Portola Valley will happen in the next 8-year cycle. If we have one in the works, we need to include that one in the works, and that would be 9 a year. I believe it could even get as high as 16 a year or 8 a year. The cycle is 8 years, so I believe we should at least have 8 units under SB9. It could go as high as 16. I didn't hear a discussion of the request to disperse the units throughout our town, and I'd like to hear comments on future plans regarding that. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see no other hands on Zoom. Anyone else in the schoolhouse? Okay, I'm going to close public comment and we can move on to our discussion of this item.
So it's been.
Yeah,
over 2
let's
hours. Can we have a 5-minute
let's
break?
take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 9:20 and we'll conclude our discussion. Corey, can you stop recording?
We can fix that pretty easily.
Might have to close.
I can't. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'd like to. Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
It's a little breeze, yeah.
Well,
Let it blow for a few minutes and maybe we close it if it gets loud again. So. Okay, we will come back to order here. Thanks for your patience. And we will begin. Might leave it open for a minute and then we'll so if it's really disruptive, we'll close it. Okay. Okay, so we have a few things that we're discussing here. We are going to have to probably have some back and forth, as Laura mentioned with HCD. There were a few questions she had and possibly others for us to discuss. There was the question of funding, some initial funding so that we could start work with urban planning partners again. There was the question of combining the fire approaches and possibly delegating that to the district or how to handle that. And then there was this question of sort of prioritizing the housing element versus the safety element or some, I guess, a path of getting those two things together along with the zoning, obviously. So I don't know where anyone wants to begin. Do you want to start with the funding? Do you want to just talk about it? It feels important to me, and I do think we have to work quickly. I think we have to get started again on this. So I feel like we should resolve that funding question quickly. Judith, you had some concerns about it, but is there a path for you to go?
Well, I'm a little confused. I was going to address those 3 questions and provide some context comments. I don't know if
Sure.
that's okay. I want to run it the way you want to run it.
But no, if you want to make comments. go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, just on a high level, I do want to thank Laura for being stoic in the face of a difficult message from HCD and having a constructive conversation. It's hard to do. It's hard for us to watch that happening. So I do appreciate your efforts and the good information you brought to us. As far as the overall reaction to HCD, to be honest, I'm very discouraged. I think we've put in what is arguably a huge amount of effort proportionally for our size relative to other jurisdictions, a huge amount financially into supporting these efforts, a huge amount of community engagement to get to a place where we had nice innovative ideas. And I don't want to assume the worst. I think if Laura can keep clarifying and keep refining what might be missing from HCD's understanding, I think we can move things to a better place. But I am highly concerned about the tone, use of a template language for our community does ring true that we might be collateral damage, that these objectives are not meant to be tailored for us. I do think my initial reaction, uninformed, is overreach by HCD. And that's disappointing given all of the efforts we've put in to comply. And we all intend to comply with the law. So I'm discouraged. And I think there's a concern about what's going on with HCD and how any community is going to come through this in any semblance of balance. I just don't see it. So I do caution us to think that if we lean in too far, that HCD will be satisfied. What I read is that they are going to have a continuous dialogue to see how far it can be pushed, especially if there is the overreach that on an initial read I'm seeing. So let me go over some of the answers to the questions, and thanks for bearing with my comments. On the budget, I am concerned, and it's not because I don't have faith in Laura and her team's ability to get things done and be efficient. But if we say, get this done really fast and we'll support it with a budget, then to me, by definition, we're ignoring other things that need to get done in the town. So I'm not in favor of just throwing money and all of our time to comply as quickly as we can, because that's not going to get us anything but a result that is HCD favorable and a very significant, I think, diminution in the quality of our element. So I would support some preliminary work done, some portion. I don't know whether it's 10 or 15,000. And then Laura, once you're more informed and we see the roadmap, I'd be perfectly comfortable saying, okay, we're going to comply and here's how we get there. But today it just seems the wrong message. I'm not convinced we should be doing nothing but the housing element from here on, and the safety element and the fire protection items are very important to me to make progress on. Fire season is upon us, not going away. So I would have an approval of a budget, but not the whole budget, because I want to see what that looks like. And then I think there's a fulsome discussion to have at the council level of, is it priority number one or is it equal priority? And I don't know that we're having that discussion in a fulsome way tonight. I do think there's great benefit in looking at the 7+13 fire measures. It is a little confusing to read them as they were submitted. And I think we do all want to get to the next level and here's what it means. So I think we should proceed to do that, because it's the only way we're going to get to a place where, we're addressing the fire district's concerns in a workable way for our town. Would I delegate it to them? For me, it's like time is of the essence. So if it's faster for them to move, great. As long as we have confidence, they'll give us something that's granular enough that we can have a good discussion around it. I would not delegate to them if we know for a fact, for example, that they're not going to be able to move on it for 6 months, because I just want to be very practical here. What's going to be the best starting point? So I would try and engage them in that discussion and come back and let us know. But I definitely think we want to start making progress on those. And then, Jeff, I think your last one was balance of housing element and safety element. I think I've already addressed that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Craig or Mary, do you want
So unsurprisingly, I actually agree with a lot of what Judith had to say. Unsurprisingly. I would definitely like to see us work with the department on fire chief stuff. I think Judith makes a good point of what's the most efficient way, but I think we need to start that conversation and do something with the 7 and 13, because I do find at this point it isn't completely clear to me what we've agreed to. I mean, I know we've agreed to these different things, but when I read them all together, I don't quite understand what they all mean. So I think working with them and having them, I mean, much like we did on this other letter, clarify, like here was our intent and here's the intent of all these things together, I think would be really powerful and useful. And I do see that fire safety is critical. I'm struggling with the timeline because if it takes HCD 60 days, then that means if we give them something the beginning of December, they might get us an answer by the end of January. And that's of course holidays. So I don't even know if that would happen. And November doesn't seem very far away. I mean, like that's enough time to do a rev, it kind of feels like, but not like multiple revs. So I guess I'm hopeful that Laura will have another follow-up conversation and get a better sense for, is there a path to completion? I think we heard a lot of, early conversation in oral comments and stuff about potentially joining some of these efforts to help pass an initiative. I think we're kind of getting to that point. The idea that we're collateral damage. It does feel like, I mean, whether that's an absolute true fact or not, it sure feels that way. And so I'm struggling with that part of it. I mean, it does feel like we're not going to satisfy HCD, and it may not even be a willful thing. Maybe if they just keep changing, people will never satisfy them because there's nobody there to satisfy. Because that's what it's starting to feel to me. It's just feeling bureaucratic. And then I wonder if we're just getting lumped in like all the other towns. And I wonder if anybody's actually said, Portola Valley is X% smaller than pick your town. Like Woodside is what, twice the size of us? And, we could look at their revenues that are probably at least twice and maybe more. That certainly seems like their budgets are a lot more robust. And then, you bring up Atherton and places like that, which have a lot more housing available to them. So, I don't know if there's a better way to pitch how people view Portola Valley, because I think they just go, oh yeah, they're these affluent communities, Los Altos Hills, Palo Alto, and in Portola Valley, Woodside, Atherton, and they don't actually tease out the details. So I don't know if there's anything we can do there, but it would certainly make me feel better. The fire safety stuff, the housing element, I do feel like we sort of need to move on both of them. Whether we need to move on the safety element per se, because I know that's a fairly technical part of the general plan, but I do feel like we need to move on the fire safety. And then on the 30K, I think I generally agree with Judith. It seems like it's sending the wrong message. I don't disagree. We'll probably have to spend that 30K to get the job done. But I'd like to at least to have another meeting with HCD and then use that for at least a more likely timeline. And here's why we think this money is going to get us to some goal. Because right now it just feels like we're kind of pouring money down the drain. Not to sound too negative about this, but it is pretty frustrating. So thank you.
Well, I would, there's a few aspects of this that I see a little bit differently. I personally, because we have Judith and Craig, who've both been on the planning commission and are representing, in fact, that planning commission point of view. I find it very difficult and disconcerting to be talking about that without the backing of the planning commission. It would have given me a chance to actually hear through what they think. So I don't want to talk about hindsight, but I think it would be useful for the community to have that somehow that message come through, that it's important to have the planning commission as part of the solution and part of the cost cut. Because for me to say we need to spend more money when we haven't even contacted the planning commissions commissions yet feels awkward. If they think we need more money, that's important. Obviously Laura knows best, but for me to become educated on it and for the community to become educated, I think we need to have them in the conversation. So it struck me in this conversation that the town council, it has a role in assigning work to the planning commission if they're not getting the work assigned. And I feel some culpability that having pointed it out earlier, when we switched liaisons, that they weren't meeting and that they were very frustrated that we didn't actually give them some work to do. And not busy work, but stuff that would have educated all of us and that would have maybe added to some of the solutions. So that's one thought from that. If we have to spend the money, a lot of that's hindsight. But I would like to know how, as a council member, I'm supposed to get action on things like that. How was I supposed to say, no, the planning commission needs work. We need them working on the housing element, even if it's in the HCD, even if we're waiting for something else. What are their thoughts? What are our options going to be moving forward? So I would like to be able to, as a council member, to know how we as a council can keep our committees functional. That's the end of my speech.
So Mary, could I ask a clarify, like, I'm not sure, as a former planning commissioner, what you're asking of the planning commission other than they meet, because they don't have a fiduciary responsibility. So we're not asking them to review whatever budget Laura puts out and says, oh yeah, we think this is a good idea. So it kind of sounds like you're just.
I think they have ideas that need to be aired.
But what is it that we would add, if we were to assign them a task? I was just trying to understand a little bit better. What is it that we would ask them?
What are our alternatives? Who should we be reaching out to make our position better understood? Our housing situation. Should we be working with Cal Cities? Why aren't we working with Cal Cities? Why aren't we working with Woodside? Why aren't we working? Should we be doing that stuff? When are we going to start that process?
Okay, yeah, those sound a little more like policy to me, which are the purview of the council rather than the commission. So you might have to think about how to craft something. Okay, thanks.
Sir?
Well, they can make recommendations.
Yeah, I'm also very discouraged. 2 years of working on this, we've said it a million times, 145 hours, hundreds of community members, staff burnout. It's super, I was very disappointed and surprised. I am concerned that the reviewer doesn't have the full appreciation of the uniqueness, and I'm an optimistic person, and will remain hopeful that a second and third conversation with Laura and them hopefully helps her understand the nuances there. I do think that our priorities should be the HCD reply and the Woodside Fire Protection lists. I'm very much in favor of not only the consolidation of those lists, but the clarification of those lists. When I read through even this most recent letter, I get confused, and I won't belabor it, but I have notes here, but they reference a successor map, establishing a map. They're very vague in their language, and it's hard to tell all throughout section A3, what they're referencing. And I would ask them to not just consolidate the 7 and the 13, but to really clarify the language so we all have a shared understanding of what is in these documents. And I think if we as council members who study these things are still confused about the language, how is the public supposed to understand what it is? And that leads to misunderstanding, and then there's misinformation. And we've been living in a situation where that's been a reality. And so because these documents did originally come from Woodside Fire, I feel like they have to own the consolidation and the clarification of them. And I do think that's important. That should be work that they would be doing versus our staff. And I think that work is fundamental to the safety element anyhow. So again, would prioritize the HCD reply and that work on these lists. My concern about, I see your points about the budget. I do trust Laura and she knows what it takes to get these kind of things done. One question I would have for Laura is, our next meeting is not until September. We have the meeting on August 23rd now. That would potentially have one agenda item. I'm concerned if we would go till September 17th or September 13th. And, that's over a month from now. And if we don't approve enough budget, would that limit her ability to make progress? And then Thanksgiving and Christmas will be here before we know it. So personally, I trust your judgment, Laura, and I would be comfortable with approving that. I think that's it. Did I cover everything? Is there anything I didn't cover?
We talked about where the housing element response fits in priorities, specifically around the safety element.
That was pretty much what I was saying in the middle. I mean, I would prioritize the housing elements reply and the Woodside Fire lists, because I feel like the Wood Fire lists are fundamental to the safety element anyhow. So, in that order.
Yeah, I agree about the frustration. I mean, we spent 2 years really trying to write a compliant housing element that would address our local safety and our rural character concerns. And it's frustrating to see them feel like we've been treated like another town. I guess in terms of the funds, I think it's important, like Craig said, to get an iteration of this done fairly quickly, just because we're just running out of time in January. It'll be here, and we could zone without a compliant housing element, but then we don't know for sure that we don't know what we have to change if the housing element changes. So I'd probably be fine approving that full amount. I'd definitely insist on approving at least part of it so that Laura can start working basically as quickly as possible to get that. We need to get through a cycle fairly quickly. I think consolidating the 7 approaches and the 7 mitigations and 13 approaches. I mean, some of those steps are specific. I mean, are very, very much under the purview of Woodside Fire District. So they really, they have to pass some of those ordinances. So we're waiting on them. So I do feel like they should be taking the lead on that. And I think putting them all together into one coherent fire policy as soon as possible is important. And other than that, I agree that the housing element and safety element are both important. We need to do as much as we can. I just also think that there's a little more time urgency here for the housing element, just probably to get that. So I hate to say, I hate to pay short shrift to the safety, but I do see a short-term prioritization of the housing element.
I'm going to be the skeptic here. Even if we submit and get a response back, I don't see a clear path to getting an element approved at the end of January. I just don't, based on this dynamic. I hope it changes. I'm very open to it changing. I don't see it happening. And so if we keep chasing compliance, we're going to end up overgiving and missing out on the opportunity to have some balance in what the town administration does and the council does. So that's the reason why I'm saying we should, I trust Laura to tell us what the steps are. I think we would all benefit from one further discussion, hearing how one further discussion that she has with HCD goes, because that will give me more of a roadmap. I mean, right now we're all reacting and the reviewer apparently needs to go get educated on some things. So I think, the way I would look at it is let's make sure that conversation happens as soon as Laura feels prepared and the HCD person is up to speed enough to have it be productive, and then circle back. I think that will be a meaningful discussion rather than just saying, let's just go full tilt at compliance. Because I honestly, you have to have as one of the things you're planning for an inability to close this thing out by the end of January. And we're not alone. I've talked to other jurisdictions and they're not even planning to submit anything until next year. I'm not a proponent of that, but we got to recognize where we are. We're between a rock and a hard place. And we should take a moment and say, what are our priorities here? And HCD compliance is a high priority. It's not the only one for me. So that's just by way of further explanation.
Well, I think the only other thing I would add is I've actually scheduled time with Don Bullard tomorrow. I'd like to better understand the maps. This really feels to me like this is a Woodside Fire Protection District issue. I mean, like, yes, we need to look at it when it applies to our building codes and stuff, but at the end of the day, this is a fire issue that ought to land pretty squarely with the fire department. One thing I'm going to talk to him about is I would like to potentially see a model that looks something like the way we do geologic safety, where we have a map and then individual homeowners could potentially challenge parts of the map to say, hey, you know, you did this based on this vegetation, but I've cleared it up and it doesn't look like this. And I got another fire expert that says, you know, that this is reduced, or some model that says that if we're going to apply this to private property, that we're not effectively taking away property rights by being overly restrictive. I mean, that's my biggest concern with these maps is they're a very, very blunt instrument. You know, CAL FIRE wasn't very blunt because it only picked one area. And so there's only one that was very high. And then, you know, we, you know, as a previous council decided to apply 7A across the town. I don't know that we're willing to take all the fire safe regulations and apply them across the town. And if we don't, then I think we do need to think about, you know, what the costs are and whether there's any kind of appeal. So I'm going to talk to Don just unofficially, just to see if there's any there. And there may not be, I don't know, but I do feel pretty strongly that this mapping stuff, you know, we keep getting caught in this loop, but it's really the fire department to say, these are the areas that you need to declare as very, and then we need to approve it, but they need to be, I think, a lot more of the lead on it. And then we need to look at it and ask some questions and work with them. But I feel like we're approving something that they're the lead on. It's just my general sense.
I do think this merits a fulsome discussion. I mean, it's an important part, and we have already agreed in principle to do the things that were attached to the ISMND resolutions. I'm probably misphrasing that, but so I think good points. We should have a more fulsome discussion specifically around all of that at another day.
Yeah, I think I'm conflating sort of two things just because I'm so excited about what, you know, so separating out the two, I believe that the fire department ought to have sort of primary responsibility for deciding on maps. Like that's separate from whether these maps have this sort of geology.
I don't mean to interrupt you there. I'm trying to both just for our agenda and just for time. I want to focus on, I mean, we are talking about the housing element update.
Okay,
I don't
so
want-
let me bring it, so let me pull it. Thank you. I mean, and yeah, thank you for bringing it back in. The only reason I'm bringing this up is this is back to the full tilt on the housing element.
Right.
I believe these are these other things that we need to be giving equal time to. So I believe that this fire map, we need to get this nailed. The 7 and the 13, we need to get nailed. I think we should spend equal amount of time on those as we do in the housing. So that's how it relates to this conversation.
I'm confused because I think you're saying that the fire agency is the lead agency on those. So I mean, it sounds like you're saying we could push some of that off on the fire district and for them to clarify, but that we could, which would give us a little more focus on the housing.
And if they accept it and we can do that, that's great. I'm saying this, basically taking the 7 and 13.
Yeah.
And basically whoever does this, bringing this stuff together and making it coherent is an important goal that should be equal to our trying to get our housing element compliant.
That I agree with. I think, you know, 7 and 13 should be one initiative. And ideally the district the Woodside Fire would start sort of refining some of that in parallel to hopefully us focusing a little more on this just to keep our timeline and the housing element itself intact.
Sorry. So anyway, it was just making sure we had balanced priorities. I think that was my high level point. So thank you for bringing me back.
My concern remains that one of the things that's happening is our committees are becoming ineffectual while we're doing other work theoretically. And I wish the heck Craig hadn't mentioned geologic safety because it just is such a misuse of our resources not to engage the Geological Safety Committee in evaluation of our safety committee, our safety situation now while we aren't working on the safety element. Would they have asked over and over again to have to allow our town consultant in geology to attend one of their meetings? And I haven't been able to get it through even on the agenda for the town council. So I just feel like one thing that's happening is that the committees are being made extremely ineffectual while we sort of work with this bureaucratic thing that's happening up here. There's nothing that is ever happening there. So again, just say, let the geology committee have a geologist to talk to so that we can actually make sure our geological safety map is some good as we move forward. That's my sum total. And I'm happy to give Laura the money she needs because she needs to do her job. You know, that's fair if we want to, if we can be. So for example, if the planning commission can help oversee the expenditures and understand what's going on, that would make me a lot happier. Then, you know, then somebody would be really watching the pot, figuring out what this money is being spent for, how much what consultant is getting for what, and we would be better informed when we have to face this again.
But are you saying the planning commission should be overseeing, I mean, should be watching while Laura spends her
I
money?
don't know, is that not true? I mean, can't they help at all?
I wouldn't ask them to be looking into operations side of it. I
Okay.
mean, that's not how we do things. I personally think there's a reason for that, but, I mean,
Okay.
they're advising us on policy and they make judicial decisions
Yeah.
on specific applications or on our legal, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on all of this, but I just
Okay,
asking planning
that's
commission to
helpful. Thank
look
you.
over Laura's shoulder to look at where she's spending money on consultants.
I
feels like
wasn't thinking of looking
intrusive.
over her shoulder. I was thinking more of helping her to figure out efficiencies, et cetera.
All right, so we have a few things here. It sounds like we actually have some consensus. I think we all agree we need to move forward with some funds for Laura to move forward with consulting. We can decide on amount. We do agree on the trying to consolidate the fire approaches into one project or document even, and sort of starting with going to the district and asking them to take the lead on that. And then that we just need to move forward on this, but do what we can on the safety element as well.
And then I would just the thing I would add is, and maybe we can pick a number, 10K, 15K, and that we will have at the September, whatever that date was, 12th, whatever that.
How about August? Yeah, August
No,
ninth.
but I
Well-
don't think, we won't have enough, because what we want is, we want Laura to have time to meet with HCD. So she needs to prep for it. They need to have that meeting. Who knows when she can get that meeting? And then we want to have a meeting to hear the output of that, so that we can then figure out the rest of the budget. So I think we're trying to give her enough budget to get there. So, and I don't know if that's 10 or 15K, but I think that sends the right message that we're waiting to see what the roadmap looks like before we fully fund this thing.
Laura, would 15K be enough for you to get started and get us to September?
Yes.
Okay. Is that an amount people? Okay, so
Yeah, I could be comfortable
15K.
with that.
Do we need, so we're appropriating the 15K for you to get started on the work. Do we need do we need a motion to approve talking about the fire strategies, or is this direction enough for you to get started?
The direction on the fire strategies, I think, is sufficient. I think it is worthwhile to take a vote on the funding, just so that we have that in the
Oh, yeah,
record
yeah.
for when we come back officially for the contract amendment.
Agreed. Yeah. I just before I asked for a motion, I was going to just see what else we could. Okay. So, all right.
Can I have one just follow-up question? Laura, just to clarify, if we don't come back for a budget update before September 13th, are you saying that 15K gives you enough money to prioritize the response? knowing that you're going to be going back, going back and forth with HCD? Is the budget limitation going to limit your work over the next month?
No,
15
I don't think
versus 30.
I think that that's enough money to do what you're asking us to do over the next approximately month and provide feedback to you and consider your next steps. I think that's sufficient.
Thank you.
Okay. In that case, I could entertain a motion for that funding of
So-
$15,000.
So moved.
Second,
Any more discussion?
they want to know.
We already had public comment, Carol, on this one. It's the same topic we had to you commented on this previously. So, sorry. No, you can't comment on, sorry. So, any more discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Hefty,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskell,
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wernicott,
Aye.
Mayor Alves.
Aye.
Motion stands.
Okay. And Laura, again, you have the guidance you need to move forward with this.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Item 4B is the housing post-approval process. And so Craig and Judith, take it away.
Sure, I'll get started. So I'm going to repeat a little bit of what's in the memo here, just to give people a refresher. When we approved the post-adoption plan as part of the housing element submission, we said that we would end up being reporting back and fleshing out the details of what that looked like. And in particular, we were planning on that, including more tight timelines and more specific implementation measures. It's been a tough summer. We've had a lot going on you all know what it is. So we needed to reschedule. And because of the discussion we just had, we're not in a position to put this forward for approval. The timelines are now kind of beside the point in part, but they're directional. So what we were going to present is the post-adoption plan as it currently exists with the fleshed out elements and go over that today. And it's more of a study session. Just here's directionally where we're going with how to implement some of these measures. We can have as much or as little discussion because this is not going to be the only time this comes before you. But given the work that we've already done and the timeline, we didn't want to leave it too long before we reviewed it and gave people some opportunity to ask questions and weigh in. So I am going to ask, I don't know if it's Jennifer, if she could pull up the document that I sent with the highlighting. Okay, yes, and it has the highlighting. And so bear with me, I don't have the scroll function control of it here. And what I'm going to do is remind people, we originally set out with a PowerPoint slide presentation. This document represents just the text out of that PowerPoint and organized, a little bit reorganized. And so what we did is we have all of the topics listed, if you scroll down a little bit more, to have the 8 topics showing. There you go. And anything in highlighting is different from the PowerPoint. And it's directional because creating an actual red line would overwhelm anybody looking at it. It nearly overwhelmed me. So the things in yellow are adds or changes, and we welcome any comments. But for example, CEQA guidelines and local thresholds, we learned a little bit more about what that would look like and just changed the phraseology. There's no big meaning in that. We do have this note at the bottom, coordinating with the Woodside Fire Protection District on the key approaches is part of what we all were talking about back in March, but now we're having a parallel effort on that front. So we're not going to emphasize the 7+13, as I'll call it for shorthand. that is going to be pursued and discussed, you know, with the Woodside Fire Protection District outside of this plan, but in parallel with. So if you scroll down to topic 1, I can remind folks what these topics are that we agreed to adopt. Okay, keep going. All the way down past that, these are just the definitions, and this is in the packet, but without the highlighting. So people can look at that if they want to see it at their own personal copy. So what we added here is the timing. If you go down and show us all the timing highlighted, paragraph perfect. So what we're saying here is item 1 was evaluate and propose sunrise opportunity sites under the housing site inventory follow-up. The second is to initiate longer term planning efforts for future housing cycles. So going beyond meeting RHNA, but being more thoughtful about the housing efforts in town and what we need to meet our community needs. So for item 1, we wanted to start 3 months after the adoption date, and that, you know, we adopted a draft, but now we have to decide what time point we can measure all of these timeframes from. And given we're making another submission, that's the variable that we have to deal with as we move this forward. And then before we can bring it for a real approval, we have to know what those timelines are. Yeah. But we had worked with Laura in order to make sure these were directionally achievable. And if she has comments on them, feel free, but they are going to change. So I'm not sure how much we should do a deep dive there. And then the longer term planning efforts, we wanted to implement that a bit later. So we were picking 9 months out. And then after 12 months, develop timelines for a work product of having a new ad hoc committee suitable to implement the intent of the sunrise. So create an initial list of viable housing sites by 15 months after the adoption date. Again, the idea here is let's try and make the sunrise meaningful and really put, you know, the council efforts and committee efforts and town resident efforts behind it. And then we really got to look out, and since we have a 2-year sunrise, we've got to start looking at 15 to 18 months, really looking at what options are we actually seeing here. And then having some kind of conclusion, looking for that to be submitted to the town council of what are the options and what are we going to do 18 to 21 months out, because there's going to have to be a date by which we just say what's viable, where are we going to go with this. In terms of the process, if you scroll down further, we added a little bit more around the process. And what we would do here is start with a town council subcommittee to be named, and they would get started with the groundwork, developing a comprehensive list of all sites, conducting initial outreach to members of the community who may themselves have properties or who might know of opportunities that should be put on the table, starting to get the public involved in looking at alternatives, maintaining a list of sites and monitoring. So a lot of the groundwork on, you know, having people just focused on looking at these opportunities. And then if you scroll down further, the work of the ad hoc committee, which would be started later on, hopefully being informed by that initial groundwork, would be formed, and they develop a process for making all of this information evaluable. And, you know, expand out the outreach to the community to make sure we're looking at sites, ordering them. We want to put more on the table and take things off if we're really serious about the Dorothy Ford Park being like the backup plan. We've got to figure out these alternatives and be open-minded about it. That's that. I'll stop after each run and Craig can weigh in. This is kind of the meatier topic. If you want to scroll down to the second topic.
I mean, the only thing I'd add, and Judith alluded to it, is you know, as we go through this, it would be great to get your thoughts on dates because we have the adoption date, which, you know, I don't know if the adoption date's going to be after we do this next revision, or is it the beginning of the HCD cycle? Because at some point, you know, when they were only a few months apart, it really kind of didn't matter, you know, but now we're talking about potentially the difference of a year. And a year versus 18 months, I mean, that's like a significant portion. So I think as you're looking through these things, I mean, any thoughts you have on, wow, it seems like this one we should get started on now because there's nothing stopping us and this is a good thing to work on versus some of these other things until we get our act squared away with HCD, we probably need to kind of be in a holding pattern. So that's the only thing I'd add is that I struggled with trying to think about how to update the timeline given the response from HCD.
And we've got to stretch to, you know, get started because at some point to actually have the housing sites available, you only have 2 to 3 years to really decide on the plan and execute within the 8-year cycle. So those are parameters.
I'll just say, I mean, I think you just need to work backwards. I mean, we know that HCD, or we know that we would probably have to start that Ford Field process if we go forward with it in 2025. I think you just have to work backwards from the day when, I mean, there's a point before that when we really have to have a viable alternative on the table. You just have to, I mean, we may have to adjust the length of time will change, but I think you just have to work from the end of the process and work back towards now and, you know, basically ask for when you want things to start or when you want to start. I mean, taking these steps.
I also think on this one in particular, thinking about what are the things, maybe when you think about the work that needs to be done, what things could happen without impacting staff? Because obviously we have an incredible amount of stuff going on with staff, but there are things that you guys have in the vision here, and several of these that I think could start with community members, you know, so long as it's not impacting staff right now. So that in addition to what Jeff was saying, working backwards, I think that's absolutely, because that we know that date's not going to move. Does that make sense? I hear you. I see you crunching your eyebrows. Okay. Didn't know how to interpret it.
I'm always nervous about things going forward too far without staff input, but that's just me.
And there would have to be, we don't want to take up staff time, but we don't want to create a do loop. And so there would have to be touch bases, maybe designating a spokesperson to just provide updates so that staff can hear what's going on, doesn't necessarily feel responsible for it, but can say, that's not going to work.
Right. So we had a great role model of that with the ADU team where there was a point person and it was a liaison and it we were really disciplined that it can only go through that one person. So.
And we were looking to those types of examples and creating other work efforts under this. So that one's going to be super important. So it is going to be more work.
I guess my other comment, this is probably stating the obvious and you guys have thought through it, is we have a moving target right now, but we do have a sunrise deadline. So if we don't get started on some of this work sooner and we're just waiting for that moving target, you're going to get in this real tight pinch.
Yeah, we may need to just put a hard date in here rather than X
Based
months
on
after
X.
the
For certain of
adoption.
these that
Yeah.
have.
And then some of the follow-up might be more flexible, but that's a fair point. All right, topic 2, the zoning design review actions. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It just seems to me logical that we should start. It seems to me logical that we should go ahead and get started on this particular aspect. I don't even understand why it's sort of tied to the approval. You know, there's this whole thing about self-certifying, but real estate changes and there's some urgency about keeping our finger in the pot or we're going to miss opportunities. So the sooner we get that ad hoc committee set up, the happier I'm going to be because people are doing it anyway. So, you know, that it's good to have some feedback to the town council.
Okay. Fair point. Okay, topic 2, zoning design review actions and related general plan updates. We know we have to do these. If you scroll down a little bit, we've already made strategic general plan update proposals, and there may be other conforming edits we don't know. But this zoning effort is currently underway, and the goal is to adopt by January 2024 as required by state law. And Laura's got this ongoing with the consultants. I don't think we need to repeat the process we were discussing earlier. And we'll just wait to hear from Laura what the granular steps on the zoning discussions will be. I don't think we need to overly get into this. Okay. My iPad is having a little bit of an issue. If you keep, okay, here we go. Yeah.
There's a question out there about, again, the use of the planning commission around zoning and whether whether the planning commission has been brought into the loop about what's happening with zoning.
So the way we were looking at it is, as is typically the case, Laura and consultants would take a pen on a first draft and bring that to the planning commission. And originally, if we were in a better place, that was planned to be taking place this month and next month.
This month, okay.
But
It's not going
it's
to.
not going to happen on that
So
timeline.
it's good to clarify that. In August of 2023, yeah, okay.
Okay.
So it won't happen.
Yep. All right, topic 3. To remind folks, this was a proposal to adopt local CEQA guidelines, local guidelines and thresholds as well. We had included this from the MMRP, and what we're doing here is drilling down into the nuts and bolts of what we want to do and how. The new language here is in number 2, to establish local thresholds per code concerning key topics that may include aspects such as what's listed here. And those are taken from the prior PowerPoint presentation. So what we're trying to do here is not create the wheel. We're trying to establish the local guidelines that are required by statute to be adopted, but the thresholds to look at other jurisdictions and borrow from what good work others have done on this. So we're trying to streamline this, but still make it meaningful. The original timeline was 6 months. And then for the CEQA guidelines, and then for the thresholds, 8 to 12 months, because they'll probably need more work. They may need more work, and they'll certainly need discussion by the planning commission and then town council. So that's on the process down below there. And I think if there's any questions on that or comments, let me know. Topic 4.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe you've, in terms of that last, the secret thresholds, it sounds like you're pursuing a little more limited scope.
Well, yes, we want to look at what local, other localities have done and borrow from those. But we do think it's important that we look at what our community has and look at similarly situated jurisdictions and try to use some of that. We think it's an additional protection for the town to make sure that development happens in the way we like it to be developed.
No, that part, I
Yeah.
understand. It sounds.
So why couldn't, same question, why can't this start? Because it has to go through the planning commission and everything, and we have to think it through and carry on and do research. Why can't this start now, even without the adoption?
Well, that's up for discussion, but our thought was we're not going to have applications most likely right out of the gate. We may be able to do some of this, but we noted the significant amount of effort on other planning items, and in particular Sunrise. We're going to lose the Sunrise opportunity if we don't really get on that. And we're trying to plan use of existing resources versus asking too much unrealistically. So that's why, but it's so open for discussion. Craig, did you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I would agree. I think the main thing here is this doesn't feel like it's a primary in terms of critical deadlines, but we can fit it in sooner, but that's going to depend on staff time and some other stuff as well. So that's the issue here is we're trying to balance all the resources. So this one, we felt like it could get pushed out a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, topic 4. This was supplemental safety measures. And so here, as set out in the PowerPoint, we want to look at the cumulative projected increase in the town population and adopt mechanisms to coordinate with neighboring jurisdictions regarding safety measures. So for example, evacuation plans, what is Ladera, what's Menlo Park doing, and how does that map out onto an increased population and number of units here? So in that respect, starting again, Mary, just to spread out efforts over time, 9 to 12 months out, and just not a one-time thing, a continuing monitoring, because these developments occur, adjustments will be anticipated to be needed. And this is going beyond what's the minimum is required by state law, but it's good planning in our view. All right, topic 5. Okay, looking at the impact of the housing element increase in units and population on services and infrastructure and insurance availability, which is an increasingly important topic. So the first set of actions is looking at the projected growth and demand on services and infrastructure and the potential impact on the town budget, as we are currently well aware of. And how are we going to maintain or improve current service levels? And this is everything from, safety related, water related, and also parks and rec related. We just want to make sure the quality of life is what we expect it to be for Portola Valley, given the increase. And then the second is to getting a better understanding of housing insurance challenges in town, which are impacting the affordability among other aspects of what we're trying to do with our housing elements. So we would start the first item 4 months after the adoption date, and then start through a town council subcommittee and staff looking at that. And there's different roles that the staff would play here. Some of it's a quick phone call to check in on, does the water service or fire department think that they're good for the then existing units of town existing in town, or do we need to really plan for a different strategy to cover those needs? On the insurance, I think we're going to need a continual effort, and we are thinking of a working group to monitor this stuff, because we'll need outreach to the community in order to make sure the service levels are being monitored effectively and reported in. Let's see. And then we'd have some community outreach sessions to allow the public to understand what the working group, if there is good work product from the working group and issues noted to be reported, we want there to be an opportunity for the public to comment whether these are general issues people are experiencing, if they exist or not. And then on the housing and the insurance for housing in the WUI areas, I think I don't need to go into why that's important at this point. I don't think I want to overemphasize that. I don't think I could overemphasize it, but there's just so much work we all recognize needs to be done there.
And I'd say, so here are examples of things where, getting you guys' thoughts on dates, because the hard dates are easy. It's like there's a hard date, you just back off the hard date. These are not as clear that they have a hard date associated with them. So this is where I think we as a council are going to need to think about priorities and available resources to apply, and some help prioritizing. So, initially we picked some numbers to try to make them fit in here. But given the scramble with HCD right now, it's a little harder to think about that. So, as we go forward, that's one thing I'd ask everybody here to think about, like, where do you think it makes sense to slot these things in so we can come to some consensus?
Topic 6, policy for use of inclusionary funds. That is actually ongoing. I'm a member of the subcommittee of the town council, and we're looking to develop and adopt the policy within 6 months was the time frame we had. We're anticipating having a session in September on the inclusionary housing policy components that we've gotten input on so far, and I need to meet with Laura about what that will be. So I think we're in good shape to be able to bring something forward for discussion there. Topic 7, just keep the community engaged and civic organizations engaged in helping the town council understand what resources might be needed in town. And the examples from the PowerPoint were, medical support services, religious organizations might be perceiving strains on town operations that we aren't. And so to keep in contact with those who are positioned to understand the needs of the vulnerable in our community, make sure that there's a dialogue there, not just a once every 4-year touch base. I don't think there's any formal meetings that we need to process and people appointed to a working group to be able to monitor this and report back to the town council. And the last topic is the housing element information repository, which I think people are enthusiastic about leveraging the information that came out of the 2-year effort on the ad hoc committee and other ancillary information that we've learned about that people can access and research. This would not be me because I'm really poor at this, but we're thinking it's a good use of time. We're looking at 9 months after the adoption date just because there's so much else going on. You could, if people wanted to volunteer and start earlier, there's no reason that this would need to wait, but we were just looking for a set of comments there on, is this important? Should we just form a working group sooner rather than later?
I don't know how you want to comment, so I'm holding off.
Yeah, no, that's it. You're done. Okay, so anytime you want.
Well, let's do questions, public comment, and then. Does anyone have questions about this?
Oh, one of my questions would be how you decided to order the topics. It's come to my attention, it's been brought to my attention that topic 5 is the meatiest one of the whole thing. And maybe it should be topic 1 because it's really about, it's the whole meat of the effects of development. It includes all those things, insurance, traffic, so forth and so on.
It's
the road.
important, but if we miss the sunrise, we miss the sunrise and there's no going back. So number
Oh, in
1 was
terms
the
of
sunrise.
urgency.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was,
That was,
and
the ordering
honestly-
was in terms of urgency. Okay.
yeah,
I
it was
understand.
more like that. Or like the zoning and design review. It's gotta happen soon. So there's a deadline for that. And then as you go farther down, it's a little arbitrary now, to be honest.
Great.
And I would add that we took the original proposal that we passed by and tried to keep it the same so it didn't get confusing to
Great,
go,
thank
oh,
you.
you mean number 1? Oh, well, that's number 3 now. So we just
Let's
sort of
not do
said,
that.
we'll just leave it alone and we'll, look at all of
Thank
them.
you. Great. Great. I want us to get started right away.
Okay. I don't think we have any other questions, so we can take public comment here. Carolyn Bertongan, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for all the work of the subcommittee to do this. I would like to encourage that you change topic 5 and topic 7 as a priority. Thank you.
Other public comment? I see no hands on Zoom. Nicholas Targ is here. Go ahead, Nick.
Hi. Yeah.
So you can lift it all
There
the way
there
up.
we go. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Hi, my name is Nicholas Targ. I'm at 80 Hayfields Road on the Planning Commission. Commissioner, I'm the vice chair on the Planning Commission, but I'm not speaking in the capacity of vice chair or being on the Planning Commission. I would observe that the Planning Commission has not met now for many months. I would like to think that it is a talented, committed group of people who's available to provide assistance, to provide additional work and muscle to help move projects and issues along. We're also available to help vet issues of priorities and of policy issues. And if that's helpful, I'm confident that the Planning Commission would be interested and available and be willing to lean into some of these projects that we're just discussing here this evening. Again, professionally, there are a bunch of us who kind of do this on a day-to-day basis. We can be helpful in that regard. So I would bring that to your attention. But also bring to your attention the fact that we actually have a housing element. Hasn't been approved by HCD, but there's mention that we have a draft housing element, and we had one, and then y'all voted on it, and we actually have one that's in place. So we have a CEQA document, we have dates which are operative, and those can be changed, of course, and council, I'm sure will help you with that. But we have a document in place. There are times and there are things that can and could be done at this point as well. I also commend your attention, just as you observed, that the issue at the Sunrise is a ticking, and there's a opportunity to miss that if we aren't careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. I see no other hands on Zoom. Anyone else in the schoolhouse? Okay, then I'll close public comment and we can go back to discussion. Does anyone want to start with any comments on this?
Remains that I would like to get this I would like to get this authorized, this council subcommittee for the site evaluation. I'd like to get it started today.
Sorry, what do you ask?
The topic 1.
The Sunrise.
The
The
subcommittee,
sunrise.
the subcommittee to start looking at property.
Thank
The
you.
council subcommittee, that's what she's asking about.
Yep. So if it's possible, I'd like to see that started today, and I'd like to see it have a citizen component as well. If it's possible to have some people who have some time to look at real estate.
Mary, we had, just to be clear what it had the town council subcommittee start to lay the groundwork and like map out what needs to be done. And that doesn't preclude public input, but it's to hit the ground running and then forming an ad hoc committee, which would be more formal and require more support. So I don't know that there's a reason why we can't get started and do that, but we were staging it for that reason. You can discuss that. But starting a ad hoc committee today, given everything that we have and that would require a lot of staff support, I think is tough to do. So a subcommittee may be more feasible. That's my view, but I'll.
I'm just going to ask, can we, well, I don't believe we can form an ad hoc committee based on the agenda. reaching of
Correct. You
this,
could direct
so.
staff though to bring back an item for a future meeting, probably the first meeting of September.
Does that also apply to the subcommittee? Like, would we have to wait for, or we'd have to agendize appointing the subcommittee as well?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I'd be
It
happy
sounds like it
to,
was a two-step process of the subcommittee first and then well, however you want to do it. But either way, I would recommend directing staff to bring back an item.
well, okay, I'm fine with that on that question. So Mary, did you have other comments on the, I mean, the rest of the?
No, I think it's great. We've got to get to work on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all saying the same thing, that the sunrise work. If there are ways, you know, emphasizing non-staff taxing ways to get started on that. I'm fully supportive of that. One thing I was thinking about with topic 8, I would assume that topic 8 is going to be an important database for topic 1. So, and this seems like something that could be really volunteer driven. And so I would be curious to know if there are ways to get volunteers working on that, because it will be a very useful tool to item 1.
Great.
The other thing that, you guys are already working on it, it definitely doesn't seem to me like topic 6, the in lieu fund, has a dependency on any of this, and we're working on it. So I say full speed ahead with that.
Agreed.
My other, in terms of all the dates, the 6-month timeline, I think it's way too early to start talking about that personally. I think until you know across the board with all of these different projects, because until we know what the start date is, it's kind of hard to even think about what makes sense. And we'll have a lot of new information by the time we get to that start date, in my opinion. So I wouldn't be passionate about noodling on your date ranges at this point.
Other
Go ahead.
than perhaps for the stuff that we know is already ongoing, the inclusionary funds, the
Yes.
zoning,
Right.
those things are
Done. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're in process.
required. Yeah. So I would, that's why I started with, for one, I think the work that you can start that doesn't have a significant impact on staff, on number 1. On number 8, I'd say, full steam ahead. On number 6, you're already working on it.
And I would just add while you're looking through
And
this,
the zoning, we have to start by a certain date. So,
I mean, the notion, the times we put in there were sort of duration, to give you guys a sense of duration that we had talked through with staff.
yeah.
So I agree with you. They're not meant to be hard and fast, but they were based on getting some staff input. They weren't just, an arbitrary.
Right. No, I figured they were thoughtful for sure. The other comment I wanted to make is it does seem when I read through this that there are a lot of references to working groups. And I guess my concern is that if there's multiple work, and maybe there's fewer than it seems to me, but are there ways, my question to you guys as you think through it is, are there ways to leverage our existing committees for any of this work? For instance, the WPC for some of the things are in here. Or consolidate working groups to have multiple projects, just so there's not, it can quickly get complicated if there's multiple working groups. And then I also wanted to dovetail that to, we know, the ongoing work that's going on with the committee structure stuff. So I think we have to think about what we can do as far as those kind of entities. I'll leave it
I
at
think
that.
Vice Mayor is referring to Brown Act obligations of our committees and looking at those and whether there are any committees that would become non-Brown Act, but then just being mindful if we're creating a working group that you work compliant with the Brown Act, or that it's set up in a way that there is no need to comply with them.
That was part of our intent, was to try and create working groups that can just do work and not be constrained by too much process or need too much staff time. So that was our intent. I think we can go back and look, but I don't think there's that many. And I think the topics are disparate enough. Once we have a better feeling for the timeline, maybe there is some synergy between two of them that we can combine. Certainly worth looking at.
Yeah, it was just a note. And then the other thing is when you guys do come back, for me, it would be really helpful to have like an executive summary type table that really looks at for each of the actions, you know, just what the action is, what the timeline is, who's the lead on it, kind of the owner of it. Is it a subcommittee? Is it volunteers? Is it working group? Is it staff? Is it consultants? So try and get a sense of the players, what the budget is, and many of these, it might be zero. And, you know, I had in here new or ongoing effort, but that I guess is kind of less relevant. But for me, you know, versus kind of just a synthesized one pager for all of these would be helpful. Just to keep us clean on who's doing what the timelines are, what the budget is.
Well, that's not my forte. And if we get I don't want to take staff time to do something like that myself. So let's talk about what would be more useful in terms of the presentation that's also feasible.
Yeah, I'm just talking about a one pager, and I'm happy to help too.
Yeah, I think we can make it happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't think I have any other specific comments or questions right now. I think so you said you weren't expecting to approve this tonight. Is that fair?
No, we were,
Study session, yes.
it was recommended this be conducted as a study session. And so we can probably do some more work on the one pager and the adjusting some of this to know what's off and running and narrow down the areas of overlap if there are of committees. So we can refine this. I need to know when it can come up for more substantive discussion, because it sounds like we want at least to approve a subcommittee on the Sunrise sooner rather than later.
Well, that was my next question, is there's a couple, it sounds like it sounds like there's a couple things we'd like to bring back, probably I guess September 13th would be the next opportunity, including for the subcommittee for the Sunrise. Well,
And
what
having
else?
more of a granular approval here, and maybe the timelines are more directional, or we just say they will start no later than, as opposed to waiting to start. Because it's important that we do all of these. We've committed to do them. But the timelines were just placeholders while we were waiting for HCD response to be on them.
It seems like September 13th meeting would be the first opportunity.
Yeah.
And for the
But I thought
September,
we only had one topic in August. What are we doing in August?
August is hopefully approving a new manager's contract.
But I mean, can't we do something else?
We were trying to limit the agenda for that meeting partly because Craig is not here. Well, Craig is not here, which probably precludes it. So I'd rather not have this discussion in particular without Craig. Okay, so on September 13th, I don't have the roll forward committed to memory, so I'm not sure what else we're looking at on September 13th. I mean, at the very least, I think the subcommittee could be an agenda item. It would be a fairly light one. We could be ready to discuss the full, like approval of the whole plan. I don't want to promise that just because I can't remember what else with other things coming up between now and then, but I'd be willing to take a look at it and see if it's. Oh, okay.
Because I don't want to leave it too long.
I agree. I agree. I'm
Thought
not
we'd be
trying
doing
to
this
forestall it.
30
I'm
days
just
out.
Trying to, yeah. I mean, yeah, so that fire code ratification is a potential, I think, a big one, and the revenue enhancements, obviously. The very least, I would say, I think we could do the subcommittee and just throw it on the summer. If there's any other, if there are small items, like any of the quick items from there that you would like to put forward, I mean, the goal would be to do all of it. and
Yeah.
then we'll look at that, but then the sort of.
The backup
The backup
position.
role would be to
Mhm.
have so is there anything else we want to direct staff right now to prepare for
For this.
any small thing, any granular? Just that subcommittee for the.
And
well,
for
I'm-
the second committee, for the repository committee.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the same committee?
Honest,
You want to?
How do we, I mean, that's.
No, because the repository is supposed to be volunteers who actually know what they're doing to go and sift through and organize. So I guess more your.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're completely different groups.
How many people do you want on each of those?
Okay, well, one of them is a subcommittee of the council, so two. And then the volunteers, I think what we're looking to is it would be helpful to get some people who were familiar with, kind of what's gone on in the last couple of years. Because at least my goal of this was to try to get the key documents and get them sort of surfaced, because a lot of them are buried in agendas. So that, the information, there's no question, it's all there. But some of it's, pretty hard to find. And since our website's really hard to search, you can't just sort of do keyword searches. So I was hoping to sort of create some kind of hierarchy and then basically within that hierarchy populate it with sort of the critical documents. So, I mean, that could be done by 2 or 3 people. We need to find the right 2 or 3 people.
To your point, we should think of who we know, who would be willing and solicit volunteers for it, because it could be really valuable.
That would likely need to be an item on an agenda, is that
Yes.
accurate? Okay.
And I also saw that Laura did put on her video, so I just, through the mayor, just was interested if Laura had anything to add to any of those topics.
Yeah, thank you, yes. Laura?
Thanks for checking in. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that I was here and we're listening and that we know what our follow-up actions are. Because there's a couple of things that I'm not sure what you want staff to do versus what council is going to prepare, more like a colleague's memo. So I heard you want to form a subcommittee to start the sunrise. And then it looks like you want to start the repository and start taking volunteers for that. And then continue to work on the full plan to bring forward as soon as possible. So is that, are the responsibility going to continue to rest with the same 2 council members and staff can just support you in preparing those things? Or did you want staff to prepare some portion of this?
I was thinking we'd refine it ourselves and work with staff to get input on, logistics and feasibility aspects if we're changing timelines. I'm open.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the main thing I was looking for tonight as part of the study session, is there anything that council members see that's in here that you go, whoa, wait a minute, what are we thinking about? Like, we shouldn't be doing this. And so, like Sarah's comment about, do we have too many of these working groups? Like that's a useful, like we can go back and look at that. So that's really what I was hoping to get out of tonight is, we did our, best shot at sort of capturing all the stuff and then fleshing it out. So, are there things that either we missed or that you think, we've sort of dialed too far? So, so I think we've gotten some good comments, and I would just ask if there's anything else along those lines, that would be helpful.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good document. I think it's great work. Thank you. And then just, I'm happy to look at it again soon, and I'm certainly happy to start that subcommittees. I agree that time is important on that particular topic. So I think we have a direction forward. We will refine this as September comes moving forward. And,
I'm still vague as to who's making the list of the sites.
That's what the subcommittee is going to be doing.
Just you 2.
No, a subcommittee to be appointed in September. Okay, so if you've got ideas, write them down, and then once
Yeah.
we form a subcommittee, it will be useful.
Right.
You could be on the subcommittee.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
no,
yeah,
I'm,
but we're not, this is not the same subcommittee. It's whatever
that's not,
subcommittee that
that's what I didn't
and appoint one,
understand.
we will
Yeah.
appoint one de novo, one
And that's
permanent.
a fairly limited thing. It's just available. 15th, yeah, but-
do you have the guidance you need? Staff has the guidance they need? Okay.
I don't want to speak for Laura. Laura, do you have any other questions?
Well, it just takes a little bit of logistical work, right? So I'm assuming we'll continue to just work together because we'll need a quick memo to appoint a subcommittee, right? Make sure we understand the scope of that. And then there'll be an appointment for that. And then if we're going to start taking volunteers for the repository volunteers, we need to figure out if there's going to be structure around that, who's going to lead it, if there's a council point person, those types of things we'll need to work out if we want to bring them both back for September 15th. Okay, great. Got it.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think we're good there. All right, next up, item 4C is the colleagues memo on the evacuation plan. Craig, do you want to take this one?
Just that the EPC has spent a good deal of effort to put together an evacuation plan. And the proposal to sort of expedite it was to create a subcommittee so we could work through and make sure we clarify the details before we bring it to a full council. My concern being if we just bring it to a full council, there'll be way too many questions and then it will just bounce right back around to a subcommittee to do this. So I was just trying to preempt the subcommittee, the full council to a subcommittee back to the council by just going to subcommittee directly. So what I would like tonight is for us to appoint 2 people to a subcommittee to basically review the document and work with the EPC subcommittee.
With the goal of bringing it back to the council for review and approval.
With the goal, exactly. Yes, exactly right.
Questions from the council? Okay. Public comment, since we are taking, we would be subpoena committee. Any public comment on this item? Randy, go ahead.
Thank you, Randy True. And I'm on the EPC and on the evacuation subcommittee. And so I know it's late. I'll try to be efficient in these comments and give the council some additional background on this decision. And we in thinking about this process, and then I'm not speaking fully for all the members, even of the subcommittee, but I also was trying to cut out a cycle. And the evacuation plan is a amalgamation of information from the agencies, the Woodside Fire District and the DEM. And what I'd like to do is ask the town council for feedback directly. There was, I think, some confusion in the process with our liaison and with Craig. I would have preferred either and to get Craig's feedback as a part of our public process leading up to our approval, or if you weren't going to act in that capacity as act as a town council member, then to just bring it straight to the town council and get feedback along with all the other town council members. So what I'd like to ask for now, in order to really expedite this, and I did suggest that we not do this subcommittee, but Craig, I'm fine with it, and you had great comments. It's just the process and getting one town council member's detailed comments when we're trying to get this approved during fire season, get it accepted, get it out to the public, seems not ideal. And so if there is substantial comment, substantial concern about this evacuation plan from any of the rest of the council members, we'd like to know that as soon as possible and bring it into the discussion that we have with Craig and any other subcommittee. So I would just ask that you all please read it. I think given this sort of confusion and what happened with Craig giving extensive comments and feedback is, and as a subject matter expert on this, I've read through the comments now multiple times. They're very helpful, important. And some I nod and say, yes, but can we do those as a subsequent revision? Because there is really issues of workload and how are these revisions going to be made? But we can talk through that. And just in that discussion, it would be really ideal to have any substantial feedback from the rest of you as individuals, given your experience with evacuation and your concerns. But please do that in light of that we can continue to revise this document. And this, it's not as if we don't know that there's additional real work to be done. I think the approval and acceptance of this helps set the stage for that work. And so it will help us further identify this. And again, this has been vetted over a long process with both Woodside Fire and the DEM. And I worked closely with Rob Young and doing a lot of the document wrangling. So, you know, it is fire season. We approved this on July 6th. And, you know, we'd like, if you know, we are coming to meet in September, to really be set up to you know, discuss the real work and move forward with this kind of baseline. Okay.
Randy, your
So-
time's up, but please
help,
finish up.
help us as committee, especially when working on this kind of important issue, be efficient and effective. And so if you have feedback, please get it to us. If you could do it by as early as Monday morning, in whatever format. And I'll share Craig's comments so it can be in light of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Nan Shostak has her hand up. Nan.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, I congratulate the EPC on getting out the draft and then the first version of the evacuation plan. I think this is an incredibly important document for the safety of the town. And I'll use Craig's word, expedite, and try to, you know, I agree with Randy that this document should get out as soon as possible because we are in fire season. So the entire Geologic Safety Committee was agreed on that it should be a top priority. The Geologic Safety Committee, a couple of us went to the EPC meeting when the draft document was discussed last, I think at the end of June, and made two comments. One was that we would like to see the document out, even in an unfinished stage, as soon as possible, because we realize that it's a living document and there will be more iterations. Second comment was that the scenario of fire following earthquake is not addressed, and we felt that we could help them with that. So they agreed, and we formed a subcommittee, and we've been in touch with their subcommittee on this, and so we're working together. And our subcommittee is presenting a draft of this edition, either a chapter or an appendix to the document at our meeting on Monday morning, 10 o'clock in the schoolhouse. If you care to come, we'd love to have you. Because we'd like to get the subcommittee would like to get the input from the entire committee before we continue. This is an area in which we do have expertise and we feel we can be additive. So please do whatever you can to expedite the process, whatever you have to do. This is a really important document and it does need to get out. So thank you.
Thank you, Nan. Rusty Days has his hand up here. Go ahead, Rusty.
Thank you. As the elected representatives of the residents of our town who live here, I'd like to ask you to manage this by objective. In 1 week, it'll be 3 years since the CZU fire, and we do not have an evacuation plan. And I think as elected representatives of the town council, you need to reflect on that and think about that and ask, well, what can you do to speed up things here? When I looked at the evacuation plan, the most difficult thing about a plan is not what you address, it's what you miss. What's not in here? What am I not thinking about? What hasn't this addressed? This week, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has issued its report on evacuation from the Paradise Fire. It's 280 pages long. It's an exhaustive, comprehensive assessment and study of what went right and what went wrong. There are very important lessons to be learned for every community in California embodied in that report. I'm happy to share it with everyone. I've asked the author of the report to come and speak to us, Alex Marangitis, so we can understand and learn from this. But among the most important lessons that they call out is if you want to prepare for evacuation, having a plan is not anywhere near enough. You have to have a program. You have to have people assigned and a budget drawn with clear responsibility, and you have to practice it. You have to drill. And even then, the plan fails and it breaks down. And in Paradise, 85 people died. NIST thinks it would probably be over 1,000 people that died if they hadn't practiced the plan, if they didn't have the muscle memory and the resiliency to adapt when things didn't go right and the unanticipated consequences hit. We live in a tinderbox. 4 o'clock in the afternoon tomorrow, just look at the wind as it rises up between 3 and 4 o'clock. It'll be 20 knots. Think about what Dana Breen called in. Lightning. That's what started the CZU fire 3 years ago. I'm not predicting anything here. No one can. Lahaina couldn't predict what was going to happen there last night. But we can prepare for it. And it's your responsibility as our elected representatives to manage this urgent need by objective. That means not just giving feedback, that means setting a date to get this thing done and applying the resources and asking the questions about what are we missing? What more can we learn? What can we do better here that we're not thinking about? Thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn Vertonghen has a hand up. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you very much. I would like to dedicate my 3 minutes to Randy True. But I first want to say it's very important to understand the issues that are ongoing. And we have presented these to town council for over 5 years. They're not being resolved. So here's Randy.
Excuse me, wait, I know we have a policy, we delegate, but
There's that the council's adopted that allows for delegation of time for additional speakers.
there is. I was under the impression, I thought, I don't have it in front of me. I thought it actually had to be done previously. I thought it had to be done premeditated. Is that-
Okay. As you know, I'm getting up to speed on all the council
Yeah.
procedures, but so
I'll be
anyway, I was
quick.
not
just
aware
have a
that
few
there
more
that
things
there
to
was
say.
a.
I thought the delegation can work like this. I've read the handbook. Look, I'll be quick. It's late. I just
Be
have a
quick, please.
couple of points to make related to this, just this document, and in whatever form or whatever caveats you could consider that could be helpful. The Woodside town government is considering it. I just got an email today from the Woodside Fire Protection District. They're sharing it with their dispatch service. So it's getting circulated, and it would be, there is definitely a lot of real follow-up work. And our committee and other citizens shared their feedback on it. And for example, Bud Trap really emphasized the need for a neighborhood component, and it's not strong at all in the plan, but then approved it anyway. So we want to take all those comments and then prioritize and figure out the next steps in the real work, especially with school starting again. And that's the reason I got into this, is because of the highlighting of need for further progress on school evacuation. Our schools are nestled deep under an evacuation order. There's the chance that they'll shelter in place. That's a really hard pill for parents to swallow, to evacuate town and leave your children. That's personally what I'd like to work on. Top priority. I wrangled this document, which was not fun, and it was a lot of work. And I think it sets us up to do more real work. Thank you, and thank you, Rusty, for the long report on Paradise. It's going to take a lot of time to digest that, and that's going to generate more waves of revision. And at a practical level, I think all of us subcommittee members are out for like 10 days, starting at the end of next week. So we really like to just take care of this and be set up for your next council meeting to have this sort of sail through. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right. Discussion. We are looking forward to appoint a subcommittee.
Yeah, I just add a couple of things. So one, we agreed to last EPC to post the draft on their website and not, buried in an agenda, but actually on the website where people could find it. That way we could link to it. So I think in terms of getting the draft people to look at, I think we can achieve that goal. I think Rusty makes a good point about trying to manage by objectives. That's part of my goal in having the subcommittee is working with EP subcommittee, because right now it's hard to tell who the audience is for this plan. It's not exactly a plan. It talks about what other departments do. It talks about what residents do. I mean, it's sort of a mix of a lot of different things. And so I think we do need to figure out kind of what our objectives are and then potentially reflect it against like the NIST study. Because I mean, I sort of break it into, there's stuff that the professionals do, there's stuff that the residents do, and there's stuff that the town has to do. And the stuff the town has to do is going to be looking at, can we improve like our evacuation routes? Can we widen roads? Things that are long-term potentially capital things, but critical things. Whereas ICS, I mean, the fire department, the sheriff, they're going to do whatever they're going to do. I mean, that's just the reality. We can tell them to do whatever, and they'll still just do what they're going to do. That's the way it works. So I think that's the critical thing about getting a subcommittee together with the EPC committee is to kind of sort that stuff out and get those sort of objectives clear. So I think we can make good progress. So that was sort of my sense in trying to move this forward. So I do think we have public hearing because I completely agree with the committee that we want people to start reading it, start getting input. So
Agreed.
On the town
on the
website.
town website.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is what Howard has told me is that it's basically functional in a way right now. It exists and it hasn't been approved by the council, but it's there and it's being used by the fire district and police.
I mean, more describes what they're going to do. It's not necessarily technically being used, but we don't need to sort that. I mean, I think that's what we're going to, sort of understand better is, who's adopting this versus who's just acknowledging it. I mean, and those are questions. And I talked to Catherine a little bit because originally the request was to adopt the evacuation plan. And the whole question then became, well, what does adoption mean? So those are the things that we need to kind of sort out so we can move this forward. But I'm in complete agreement that, the sooner we get information out, and the sooner we move forward on this, the better.
I agree. Okay. So we are looking for 2 members for subcommittee. Craig, I'm assuming that you would, I think that makes complete sense. Is anybody else interested in this one? I've had a few conversations with Craig about it. I'd be happy to do it unless somebody else feels strong. But so the 2 of us will, I am suggesting that the 2 of us be the subcommittee. So I really like a motion to that.
I will make a motion for the creation of the subcommittee for the evacuation plan with Jeff and Craig.
Second.
Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Aye.
Councilmember Hefty,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskell,
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warnikoff,
Aye.
Mayor Alves.
Aye.
Motion
Okay.
stands.
Okay, thank you. Get to work. All right. Council liaison reports. Does anyone want to pull an item?
Nope.
Okay. Any public comment on the liaison reports? Carolyn Bertongan, go ahead.
Thank you very much for town council members to attend our meetings. I was looking through Mrs. Haskell's committee or summary for the finance committee. I think there's one component that is missed out, and it's and I would like everybody to watch the YouTube of the finance committee because they strongly feel that other committees should be involved in decision, not necessarily in decision making, but at least help staff to evaluate the progress of what we're making. It was the chair of the finance committee who was suggesting PBDS, the Bike and Pedestrian Traffic Safety Committee, to have an input and even look at the services provided by the sheriff. We have so many inconsistent reports. We have dealt with them. We know what the residents feel about the services. And so we would like to have an opportunity to help town council and staff to make the right decisions because yeah, we're trying to figure out how we can help. We have looked at the charter. It's our responsibility to improve bike, pedestrian, and traffic safety. And for some reason, we have not come to any solutions. To give you an instance, we have approved the safety study in 2019. We had 285,000 approved in the budget. And as we look into our town, nothing has been done. And there's several other funds that fund street signs. We would like to have the ability to look what the consultant is doing. As I proposed to town council before, it would be helpful for the vendors, not the staff. We know that staff is overwhelmed. The vendors have to issue details on the work that they provide before they get the payment. That is done everywhere in private work. So I don't see how other vendors can do that without. I've seen some improvements, but on the warrant list, I would like to give you some comments. And for instance, when consultant Krupka continues to get paid for ongoing traffic and transportation, and we don't know what's going on, we don't see the improvements, we would like to see that. So I think, I hope that town council will look at the recommendation from the finance committee, and it's not just PBTS, they recommend other committees to help them figure out what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a comment to follow up on that because I'm the liaison with the DPTS. And they met and the sheriff has not been there for the last 2 meetings and they have not given a report, which is part of the reason, part of what they're supposed to do for that committee. And so from that point of view, as far as reviewing the sheriff's contract, we feel that they're actually not fulfilling that part of their contract right now.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on the liaison reports? That was our last item. Oh, sorry, it is not our last item. Our last item is the town manager report, interim town manager report. Howard, did you have anything to report?
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, that brings us to item 7, which is adjournment.
Yeah, and can be done after adjournment, but are you willing to go to the?
I'll be there Monday morning.
On
Yes.
Monday,
Yeah,
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you,
Then we are
Howard.
done. Thank you. Thanks you. Thanks Howard. Thanks Laura, if you're still there. Thank you. Catherine.
Howard, do I need to do anything on the iPad here?
When the meeting stops, just press stop camera and mute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we could be over. Thank you.